Hi guys. Tonight we step quietly into a place where the wind never seems to rest. You can hear it already, can't you? A long sigh through pine trees, a low creak against rough wooden walls, a ghostly hum that seeps into your bones. You're standing outside a log cabin on the American frontier, probably somewhere in the early 1800s. It's deep winter, the kind that burns your lungs and freezes your eyelashes when you breathe. You open the door, and a wave of smoky warmth spills out. Inside, a family huddles by the fire, their faces glowing like small suns against the shadows. You realize how fragile this little box of wood and heat truly is. One wrong gust, one bad frost, and they might not wake in the morning. You probably wouldn't survive this night yourself, not without a miracle or a mountain of blankets. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing that little constellation of places we all come from. Now, dim the lights and let the night take over. You trudge through the snow toward that cabin door again, the ground crunching beneath your boots. The air feels sharp, almost alive. In the distance, a wolf howls, and the echo rolls over the hills like slow thunder. You imagine what it was like for early pioneers who came here with wagons and faith, but very little else. No central heating, no insulation, no electric lights humming quietly in the background. Just wood, sweat, and the will to make it until spring. The cabin itself is small, barely 12 feet across. The walls are built from rough-hewn logs, notched and stacked, sealed with a strange mixture of mud, clay, moss, and hope. The fire flickers inside, throwing uneven shadows that dance across the rough timber. You step closer and can almost feel the warmth pulling you forward. Someone inside is stirring a pot, and the smell of cornmeal mush mixes with wood smoke and damp wool. Every surface tells a story. The table is scarred and hand-carved, the chairs uneven. The air tastes faintly of ash. Outside, frost glitters on the window panes like silver lace. You think of your own bed back home, soft, clean sheets, the low hum of the heater, a cup of tea waiting by the bedside, and you realize how absurdly luxurious it all is. These people slept through nights that would kill most of us within hours. The mainstream historical fact is this. Many early pioneers built single-room log cabins that measured barely more than a few steps in any direction. Families often included several children, sometimes even hired hands or visiting neighbors, all sleeping in the same room. The fire had to be kept alive through the night, or frost would creep in and cling to their blankets. In some parts of the Appalachian frontier, temperatures dropped low enough to freeze ink in the inkwells and milk in the pails beside the bed. You pause to listen to the small sounds inside the cabin, the popping of sap in the firewood, the sigh of logs as they settle in their place, the quiet breathing of someone already asleep in the corner. The pioneers didn't think much about comfort. Survival was comfort enough. They measured warmth by whether your fingers could move in the morning. A quirky little fact slips in here too. Some settlers, short on iron pots or proper chimneys, used a hollowed-out log as a fire basin inside the cabin. They filled it with glowing coals and covered it with sand to radiate heat slowly through the night. Others used heated stones wrapped in cloth to tuck at their feet, a kind of rustic hot water bottle. A few even burned dried animal dung when wood was scarce. It didn't smell wonderful, but the warmth was real. You can feel the texture of their struggle just by picturing it. Imagine lying under a pile of coarse wool blankets, hearing the creak of the roof under snow, and the distant cracking of trees as the cold tightens them. The darkness is total, except for that orange heartbeat of firelight on the wall. You shift under your covers, maybe with someone's cold feet pressed against yours for warmth. You breathe through your nose because your mouth is too dry from the smoke, and yet, somehow, you sleep. Historians still argue whether life in these cabins was as bleak as diaries make it sound. Some believe the constant physical work of frontier life kept people so exhausted that they slept deeply, despite the cold. Others suggest many never truly rested, that winter nights were long battles against frostbite and fear. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two. Hardship and adaptation, side by side, like the logs in those walls. Your eyes drift across the room. The fire flares once, showing the shapes of tools hanging on the wall: an axe, a musket, a handmade broom. Everything has a purpose. Nothing is ornamental. A single candle burns on the table, its light trembling in the draught from the door. A dog curled near the hearth opens one lazy eye as you move. You can almost feel the warmth on your own skin, faint but precious, as if borrowed from centuries past. Outside, the world keeps freezing. Snow gathers on the roof, icicles form on the eaves, and the wind keeps hunting for a way in. But inside, humanity persists. A child stirs in her sleep. The father pokes at the fire with a stick, muttering softly. The mother sighs, pulling the quilt higher over their bodies. In this tiny wooden shell in the endless cold, they've created a fragile island of heat, light, and life. That, more than anything, is what survival looked like. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to that silence between the crackles. The cabin breathes like a living creature, expanding and settling, the wood whispering under its own tension. The wind outside howls again, but this time it sounds far away. You can almost believe the walls are strong enough to hold it back. That's how the pioneers began every winter night, by building a fortress of warmth one ember at a time, hoping it would last till dawn. You wake before sunrise, and the world is silent except for the slow, steady drip of melting frost near the hearth. The cabin smells like smoke, damp wood, and faint animal musk. Your breath curls in front of your face like mist. For a moment you think you are outside, until you realize that even inside these log walls, the cold still finds its way in. You pull the blanket tighter and glance around the room. Everyone else is still asleep, cocooned beneath layers of wool and patched linen. The fire has burned down to embers, glowing like buried rubies. You move quietly, careful not to wake the baby in the corner. This is what the pioneers called morning, but to you, it feels like the middle of the night. Outside, a pale light leaks through the cracks. You decide to step out for firewood, and the shock of cold air hits you like a blow. The world is white and brittle. Your boots crunch into snow that squeaks with each step. The log cabin looks both sturdy and fragile, its seams packed with frozen mud and straw. The roof is thick with snow, the smoke hole still faintly steaming. This is survival architecture, nothing more. The pioneers who built it didn't have architects, only axes, saws, and stubborn hands. Building a cabin in this wilderness was less about style and more about speed. Families arriving on the frontier had only weeks before the first snow. They found trees thick enough to fell, stripped the bark, and started stacking. Each log was notched at the corners, fitted together like puzzle pieces. Between the gaps, they pressed a mixture of whatever they could find: clay, moss, grass, even animal hair. Some called it chinking, others called it desperation with a purpose. You can imagine the sound of it: the thud of an axe, the rasp of a saw, the dull thump of mud slapped between the seams. The mainstream historical fact here is that early American settlers, especially in regions like Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and the Ohio Valley, built their cabins following methods borrowed from Scandinavian and German immigrants. The logs were carefully notched to lock tightly together, often in a style called the saddle notch. Roofs were pitched steeply to shed snow, and clay chimneys were added to direct smoke upward. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. For most, the cabin was meant to last just long enough to claim the land and survive the first few brutal winters. You glance back toward the door. Inside, a faint orange light flickers as someone adds new wood to the fire. You hear the baby stir, the muffled sound of a mother's lullaby, the creak of the wooden bed frame. These cabins were alive with noise, even when silent. The logs expanded and contracted with temperature changes, making soft groans in the night. Mice scurried between floorboards. The wind moaned in the chimney like a restless ghost. If peace ever existed here, it was a rough-edged peace. A quirky little detail often lost in the textbooks is that many pioneers reused wagon canvas or old sails as roof linings inside their cabins. These fabrics helped keep the dust from falling through the roof cracks and gave a slightly softer look to the ceiling. Some even painted them with lard or oil to repel drips when the snow melted. It was an early form of insulation, equal parts practicality and ingenuity. You picture yourself helping to build this place. Your hands are cracked, your nails caked with resin, your face raw from the wind. Each log weighs more than you do, and you haul them with nothing but rope and stubborn will. The sound of chopping echoes through the frozen forest. When night falls, the muscles in your back feel like stone, and your reward is to sleep in a half-finished hut that smells like sap and smoke. But when the first blizzard hits and your walls hold firm, it feels like a small victory against the universe. Historians still argue whether these cabins were symbols of freedom or of desperation. Some romanticize them as monuments to rugged self-reliance, while others see them as prisons of isolation and poverty. In truth, they were both. They kept people alive, but they also trapped them inside endless winter nights where loneliness was louder than the wind. Back inside, you warm your hands near the fire. The wood pops and sparks jump upward like tiny fireflies. You can feel the heat prickling your skin, thawing the ache in your fingers. The walls shimmer with light. A man in rough homespun clothes sits on a stool, mending a boot. His wife pours cornmeal into a pot, stirring slowly. The air hums with quiet purpose. The cabin, despite its roughness, feels like a world of its own, small but complete. You start to notice how carefully everything is placed. The hearth is always on the side that catches the morning sunday. The sleeping area sits opposite, away from drafts. Even the single window, often made from greased paper instead of glass, is angled to let in just enough light without leaking too much heat. These details weren't luxuries, they were lifelines. Outside again, you watch the smoke drift upward in a lazy spiral. It smells of pine and oak, of something burning clean. You can almost imagine the invisible warmth spreading out into the frozen air, a fragile bubble against the cold. A blue jay cries from a nearby branch, its feathers puffed up against the chill. The landscape stretches out endless and empty, the horizon a blur of grey trees and snowfields. Somewhere, far beyond sight, another family is doing the same thing, tending their fire, patching their roof, building a small human pocket against a world that doesn't care whether they make it or not. You step back inside and close the door. The latch clicks softly, sealing out the wind for now. The warmth greets you like a living thing, and you sit close to the fire until your skin tingles. You can almost forget, for a few heartbeats, how easily the cold could take it all away. That is how early American pioneers built their shelters. They stacked trees and courage into something that could defy winter itself. Every log was a line of defense, every crack a battle fought with mud and prayer. The cabin was never just a house, it was a statement. We belong here, even if the wilderness disagrees. You wake to the sound of the wind brushing softly against the cabin walls. It is not a howl tonight, more like a long whisper slipping through the forest. The room still holds the faint warmth from the fire, though the edges of the window panes sparkle with frost. You sit up and feel the rough wool blanket scratch against your skin. The cabin breathes quietly, wood creaking and sighing as if it were a tired animal. Outside, dawn begins to stretch pale blue light over the snow. Inside, one thing matters more than anything else: the hearth. The fireplace is the heart of the frontier home. Without it, no one could last through a single winter night. Every motion of daily life circles around it. You imagine kneeling on the packed dirt floor, coaxing a weak flame back to life with a twist of dry bark. The smoke rises slowly at first, curling through the chimney made of sticks and clay. When it finally catches, the small fire crackles with a sigh of relief, filling the room with that sharp, earthy scent of burning pine. In that moment, you can feel the difference between life and death measured in inches of flame. According to period records, most settlers built their chimneys from mud and wattle before they could afford brick. These early chimneys were often lined with stones or sticks smeared with clay. If the mixture cracked or froze, sparks could slip through and set the roof ablaze. Still, the fireplace served as kitchen, furnace, and furnace of courage all at once. Some pioneers even kept their newborns in wooden boxes near the hearth during harsh nights, so the heat could reach them first. One curious detail from frontier households was the way they banked fires at night. Instead of letting the flames die out, families covered the embers with ashes, trapping enough heat to restart the fire at dawn without striking new flint. Children were often warned never to disturb those grey mounds, as a single puff of breath could ruin the entire night's warmth. Others took pride in claiming their hearths never truly went cold all winter long, a kind of quiet competition between neighbours who understood what endurance really meant. You crouch closer to the fire, feeling the uneven heat on your face. Sparks leap and settle like golden snow. The kettle hums gently on the hook, a soft lullaby of boiling water. The smell of corn mush fills the air, faintly sweet and comforting. You can imagine the family gathering here, rubbing their hands, sipping hot cider, letting the warmth soak into their bones after a day of cutting wood or hauling water through the snow. The light flickers over their faces, making them look older, wiser, and endlessly tired. Researchers continue to question how effective these open hearths really were at heating an entire cabin. Some claim that most of the heat escaped straight up the chimney, leaving only a few feet of true warmth near the fire. Others point out that the radiant heat, combined with the small size of the room and the thick log walls, could make the space surprisingly cozy. Perhaps it depended on the skill of the builder or the luck of the weather. No two cabins were ever quite the same. You sit back and let the warmth settle over you. The firelight reveals the uneven texture of the logs, each one carved by hand. Above the hearth, a few iron pots hang from a wooden crane that can swing in and out of the flames. The stones at the base are blackened with years of smoke, but they hold their heat long after the fire dies down. On the mantel sits a row of simple treasures: a clay pipe, a tin mug, a cracked Bible, a sprig of dried herbs tied with twine. These were not decorations. They were talismans against the cold, small reminders that people could still hold beauty in a place ruled by frost. Outside, the world stays frozen, but inside, you hear life unfold in soft rhythms. Someone hums a hymn while brushing ashes from the hearth. A child stirs the pot, scraping the bottom for browned bits. The dog shakes itself awake and pads over to the door. Every movement revolves around this glowing center. The fireplace isn't only warmth, it's community, rhythm, and reassurance that morning has arrived again. One surviving journal from an Ohio settler describes how neighbors could identify each household at night by the shape of its chimney smoke. Each plume rose differently depending on the kind of wood burned and how the hearth was built. On clear nights, the hills shimmered with faint trails of smoke drifting into the stars, like lanterns for the lonely. You imagine standing outside your own cabin, breath steaming, looking across the valley at those thin grey ribbons. Every one of them meant another family alive, another fire still breathing in the dark. There's a beauty in that image that still lingers centuries later. The crackle of flame, the scent of charred pine, the golden shimmer against rough-hewn wood. You can almost hear the quiet laughter of a family sharing a meal, the low murmur of a story passed around the hearth like a secret. These moments were fragile, yet somehow eternal. The pioneers built more than shelter. They built a circle of light in a sea of winter. And when they finally drifted off to sleep beside that flickering glow, they knew it might be the only warmth the world would ever offer them. The morning fades into a grey afternoon, and the wind outside thickens with new snow. You step closer to the cabin wall and run your hand along the seams between the logs. They are rough, uneven, cold to the touch. Here, in these narrow lines, lies the difference between warmth and frostbite. Every pioneer learned that lesson quickly. The secret was in the sealing, a process that turned a pile of trees into a living shelter. It was not glamorous. It was muddy, messy, and slow, but it kept people alive when the temperature dropped low enough to freeze water inside a cup. Contemporary accounts describe how settlers filled the spaces between logs with anything that might stop a draft. They used clay, dirt, moss, grass, and even ashes from the fireplace mixed with water. This patchwork mixture was known as chinking. When it dried, it hardened into something resembling primitive cement. Over that, they stuffed a second layer of softer material called daubing to help keep the cracks flexible. The process had to be repeated every year as the wood shifted with heat and cold. You imagine a family crouched outside, bare hands red from the chill, packing handfuls of sticky mud into the seams while the wind threatened to undo it all. One forgotten custom involved using animal hair or even horse manure to strengthen the clay. It sounds unpleasant, but it worked. The fibers acted like binding threads, keeping the mixture from crumbling when the logs expanded. Some settlers even mixed crushed seashells or wood ash for extra durability. The smell lingered for days, but the result was a cabin that could stand against a blizzard. You can almost hear the squelch of the mixture as they pressed it into place, the faint rhythm of survival echoing in every motion. The texture of the cabin changes as you notice the small details. The logs have aged to a dark bronze, glossy where hands have brushed them over the years. In the corners, cobwebs hang like silver threads, catching sparks of firelight. You lean close and see frost creeping slowly along the inner cracks, curling into delicate crystals. The cold always finds a way in, no matter how well you patch. But each layer of mud, moss, and effort tells the same story: persistence. Surviving diaries reveal that chinking was often a family affair. Children gathered moss from nearby trees, mothers stirred clay in wooden tubs, and fathers climbed ladders to seal the upper gaps. It became a ritual of sorts, part of the endless preparation before winter. Those who delayed too long paid the price in sleepless nights and frozen toes. One settler wrote that you could tell which cabins were well sealed by the sound of their walls. Tight walls made a low hum in the wind. Loose ones rattled like teeth in the cold. There's ongoing debate among social historians about how effective these makeshift insulators truly were. Some argue that the thermal mass of the logs themselves did most of the work, while the chinking added little. Others insist that those humble seams made the difference between frost creeping inside or staying out. Perhaps the truth is that every small effort mattered. When you live surrounded by cold, even a handful of moss can feel heroic. You step back and imagine the pioneers working in silence, their breath visible in the air. Each handful of clay was another gesture of defiance, a promise to outlast the season. The smell of wet earth mixed with smoke and sweat must have filled every breath. You picture their hands cracked and raw, knuckles stained with mud, faces dusted in pale frost. Still, they smiled. The work meant safety. It meant their children might wake in warmth instead of shivering in the dark. One curious record from a traveling clergyman describes a winter visit to a remote settlement in Tennessee. He wrote that the cabins appeared mud-blooded, like beasts of earth, yet full of warmth and light within. He marveled at how something so crude could glow so softly at night. That strange beauty still lingers in your mind, a structure that looked half-born from the ground, breathing smoke into a pale winter sky, its walls patched with mud and faith. Inside, the family finishes their daily chores. The mother wipes the walls near the hearth with a damp cloth to keep soot from settling too thick. The father tests the corners, pressing his fingers against the seams to check for drafts. A faint whistle from one side tells him where the next patch will go. They move together like dancers who know the steps by heart, rehearsing the same motions their parents once did. You can almost feel the rhythm in their lives, every action designed around warmth. The wind rises again, brushing the cabin like a restless hand. Snowflakes slide through the air, whispering against the window. The walls creak but hold firm. You take a deep breath and catch the scent of wet earth mixed with smoke. It is the smell of protection, of effort turned into safety. The cold may be endless, but for now the fire burns and the walls stand. You close your eyes and listen to the crackle inside and the wind outside, two ancient sounds locked in a quiet struggle. The pioneers learned to live between them, holding on to warmth one handful of clay at a time. The night deepens, and the snow outside falls heavier now, each flake a soft whisper against the roof. You sit beside the fire, staring at the rough outline of a bed in the corner. It is simple, almost primitive. 4 posts, a frame of planks, and a sagging lattice of rope or rawhide strips. On top lies a thin mattress that looks more like a sack than anything familiar. Yet this, for the pioneers, was the height of comfort after a day of work in the freezing wild. You move closer and touch the surface. It rustles faintly, and a faint, earthy smell rises into the air. According to surviving household inventories, most early settlers made their own beds from whatever they could gather nearby. The base layer was straw, hay, or dried leaves stuffed into a rough linen or ticking case. Families who could afford better added feathers plucked from geese, though even that luxury required months of collecting. Some settlers mixed materials, layering straw at the bottom for firmness and feathers, or rags on top for softness. Every few weeks, the filling had to be shaken out, dried near the fire, and repacked, or it would grow damp and mouldy. The result was a bed that felt alive in the strangest ways, rustling, shifting, sometimes even crawling with tiny visitors from the barn. One lesser-known habit was sprinkling dried herbs, such as lavender or pennyroyal, inside the bedding to deter insects. The faint scent also helped mask the odors of sweat, smoke, and wet wool that clung to everything through winter. Some women stitched small pouches of herbs into the seams of the mattress to keep away mice. Others hung sachets near the headboard, a kind of homemade perfume for nights when the wind smelled of frozen earth. The light from the fire flickers across the bedding. You imagine lying there after a day of hauling water or chopping logs. Your body sinks into the straw, the rough linen scratching lightly against your skin. The air smells of smoke and sweat, but also something pure, something earned. You close your eyes, and the faint creak of the bed frame joins the sound of the wind outside. Comfort, in this world, means not being cold enough to ache. One well-documented practice of the era involved trundle beds, low frames on wheels that could slide under the main bed during the day. Children slept there, often side by side, wrapped in old quilts made from worn-out clothes. At night, the trundle would be pulled out and placed close to the hearth so the little ones could catch the fading warmth from the fire. Parents kept their own bed nearest the wall, a position thought to block drafts. Guests, when they came, slept wherever there was floor space. Privacy was a luxury no one expected. Some experts suggest that the physical exhaustion of frontier life allowed people to sleep deeply despite the discomfort. Others believe that sleep came in fragments, short bursts interrupted by chores or the need to feed the fire. Whatever the truth, diaries reveal that families often rose several times a night to adjust blankets, stir embers, or calm children frightened by the groans of ice shifting on the roof. Rest was not a peaceful escape, but a negotiation with the cold. One curious story tells of a pioneer couple in Vermont who filled their mattress with dried corn husks when hay ran out. The sound, according to their granddaughter's memory, was like sleeping inside a bag of music. Every movement made the husks crackle softly, a kind of lullaby in the dark. When spring came, they burned the old filling and replaced it with fresh straw. Nothing in the cabin was wasted, not even the bedding. You run your hand over the patchwork quilt lying on top of the mattress. The colors have faded, but you can still see the pattern. Bits of old shirts, pieces of baby clothes, a square from a worn apron. Each scrap carries a memory. sewn together into warmth. Women often made quilts in groups, trading fabric and stories, turning hardship into art. The stitches are small and precise, the kind made by hands used to patience. The quilt is both practical and deeply human, a comfort born from connection. Inside the cabin, the light grows softer as the fire settles into coals. The family begins to prepare for sleep. The father banks the embers, pushing ash over the glowing heart of the fire. The mother shakes out the blanket, the sound a gentle rhythm in the quiet. The children whisper and giggle, their voices small and sleepy. The dog circles once and curls beside the hearth, sighing contentedly. Everything slows, even the air itself, as if the cabin has exhaled after a long day. You lie down now, feeling the uneven surface of the straw mattress beneath you. It is not soft, but it holds your shape in a way that feels honest. You pull the quilt up to your chin and breathe in its faint scent of smoke and herbs. Outside, the snow continues to fall, thick and silent. The fire gives one last pop, and the shadows dance across the ceiling. In this tiny wooden room, surrounded by the heartbeat of wind and the pulse of flame, sleep comes not as luxury but as survival. You can almost hear the past whisper to you, reminding you that warmth was once the rarest treasure of all. The cabin is dark except for the faint orange glow breathing from the hearth. The air is cool but not freezing, and the quiet feels heavy, almost sacred. You can hear the slow breathing of the people around you. The bed creaks softly as someone shifts beneath the quilts. You realize how close everyone sleeps here. There are no separate rooms, no hallways, no privacy, just warmth shared in the simplest way, through bodies, through breath, through presence. On the frontier, sleeping close was not a choice of affection. It was a matter of staying alive until morning. Contemporary letters from settlers describe nights where entire families, sometimes with guests or neighbors, crowded together beneath a pile of blankets. A large bed might hold the parents and youngest children, while older ones curled at their feet. Visitors were often invited to share the same space, a gesture of hospitality that modern minds might find awkward. Yet in a room where frost crept across the walls, everybody became part of the heating system. To share warmth was to share survival. One forgotten detail comes from a diary kept by a widow in upstate New York around 1811. She wrote that during the coldest months she let her chickens roost on a beam near the hearth. Their warmth, she claimed, made the mornings bearable. Some pioneers even allowed small livestock to shelter inside overnight, the animals forming a barrier of living heat between the humans and the cold. The smell must have been thick, but so was the gratitude. You pull your own blanket tighter, just imagining it. The air inside the cabin holds layers of scent, smoke, sweat, damp wool, faint traces of tallow from the candles. The floorboards creak under shifting feet. Someone coughs softly in the corner. A child mutters in sleep. The sound is strangely comforting, like rain against a window. You can feel the shared heartbeat of this small human group, every breath clouding faintly in the cold air. According to journals from settlers across the Appalachians, winter nights often blurred the lines between family and community. When travelers knocked at the door after dark, they were almost always invited in, no matter how little space remained. Turning someone away into the snow was nearly unthinkable. Beds were rearranged, straw was spread on the floor, and everyone found a place to rest. The warmth of the group became its own kind of safety net, a fragile web of shared humanity stretched thin across the wilderness. Some experts suggest that this habit of communal sleeping built a deep sense of trust among frontier families. Others point out that it caused tension, as privacy vanished and exhaustion magnified small irritations. The truth likely rested somewhere in between. Nights inside the cabin were both intimate and claustrophobic, filled with the small sounds of bodies shifting in the dark. A sneeze, a snore, a whispered prayer. Yet beneath it all, a strange peace lingered, the peace of people who had no one but each other. One curious account tells of travelers snowed in for weeks with a family they had never met before. They shared the same straw bedding, ate from the same pot, and took turns tending the fire. When spring finally came, they described the experience not as hardship but as the longest sleepover heaven ever allowed. It seems warmth could make even strangers feel like kin. You picture the moment before everyone settles fully into rest. The fire is low, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the logs. The father adjusts the quilt at the edges of the bed to keep the cold from creeping in. The mother hums a tune, a soft melody that mingles with the crackle of the fire. The children are already half asleep, their faces slack and peaceful in the dim light. The air hums with quiet life, and even the draught near the door seemed to pause, as if unwilling to break the spell. Researchers continue to debate whether this constant togetherness fostered stronger family bonds or made emotional distance inevitable. Some believe that sharing space so closely nurtured empathy and tenderness, while others suggest that people learned to build invisible walls in their minds to cope with the lack of solitude. The written records give glimpses of both outcomes. You can almost feel it, that tension between connection and confinement woven into the darkness of every winter night. You lie still and imagine yourself in that bed, pressed shoulder to shoulder with others. Warmth spreads slowly, like water soaking through cloth. It is uneven, imperfect, but it keeps you alive. You listen to the breathing, the fire, the wind. The world outside is enormous, frozen, and indifferent. Yet inside this small space, life pulses quietly, fragile, and determined. You think about how much meaning a single degree of warmth once held. Here, love is measured not in words, but in shared blankets and the gentle exchange of breath. The night deepens, and the fire flickers again, a final heartbeat of light before sleep takes everyone together. Morning creeps back with a dim grey light, the kind that makes it hard to tell whether the sun has truly risen. You can hear a sound outside, steady and familiar, the dull thud of an axe splitting wood. The rhythm carries through the cold air like a drumbeat of survival. Every log chopped means another few hours of warmth, another night held back from the edge of frost. Inside the cabin, smoke drifts lazily upward, and the faint smell of resin clings to your clothes. Firewood is the lifeblood of this world, more precious than coins, more valuable than gold. Surviving ledgers from trading posts reveal that settlers often measured their wealth in cords of wood stacked neatly outside the cabin. A cord, roughly 4 feet high and 8 feet long, could burn for days if rationed carefully. Families spent much of autumn gathering and splitting trees, hauling them back through the mud and snow. Oak, hickory, and maple were favorites for long-lasting heat, while pine burned bright but fast. The woodpile was not simply fuel, it was a monument to hard work, proof that the family was ready to face the coming freeze. One curious note from a farmer's diary in 1798 mentions that children were often taught to read the wood as others might read letters. They learned to tell by touch and scent whether a log was dry enough to burn, to judge the weight that meant seasoned wood. Parents would test their skill by letting them choose the next log for the fire. A wrong choice meant smoke that choked the room or a fire that died too soon. Learning this small art was as essential as learning to speak. You step outside into the brittle air. The world smells of pine and frozen earth. The woodpile stands against the wall of the cabin, each log stacked carefully to keep out moisture. A hatchet leans against a stump, its blade glinting faintly in the morning light. You lift a log and feel the weight of it, solid and cold. The bark flakes away under your glove. Inside that simple piece of wood is stored sunlight from months past, trapped and waiting to be released in the fire. According to local records from New England settlements, some families burned through as much as 20 cords of wood in a single winter. Gathering that much required entire weeks of cutting, hauling, and drying. The work began long before the first frost, usually in late summer, when the men would venture deep into the forest. They chopped fallen trees, dragged them home by mule or sled, and split them into manageable pieces. The noise of axes echoed for miles, a sound of civilization claiming a foothold against wilderness. There is an old saying from those times: a man warms himself twice with firewood, once when he cuts it and once when he burns it. You can feel the truth in that. Each swing of the axe is a spark of defiance against the cold. Your muscles burn, your breath steams, and the wood splits with a satisfying crack. Even in exhaustion there is pride. The pile grows higher, and you can almost feel the coming winter bow its head in respect. One forgotten trick among the pioneers was stacking green wood at the bottom of the pile, then topping it with seasoned logs to protect it from rain. Some even covered their stacks with slabs of bark or old canvas from wagon covers. They understood that wet wood was worse than useless. It smoked, hissed, and filled the cabin with fumes. A good woodpile was like a pantry of heat, built with precision and care. Some historians suggest that the constant labor of chopping wood shaped the rhythm of frontier life itself. Days were measured not by hours, but by how many logs one could split before sundown. Others argue that it fostered a deep respect for nature, teaching settlers that even the trees they cut deserved gratitude. Letters from the time often include blessings spoken over a fallen oak, as if thanking it for the warmth it would someday give. You carry an armful of wood back into the cabin. The warmth inside feels richer now that you've faced the cold again. You kneel and feed the fire, laying each piece carefully so it catches without smoke. The flame responds instantly, a sudden flare of gold and red licking the blackened stones. The sound is comforting, a soft crackle that fills the silence. The room brightens, and faces begin to stir in the dim light. A mother stretches near the hearth, a child rubs sleep from her eyes, and the day begins again. One traveler's account from 1817 describes visiting a cabin in the Kentucky wilderness and being struck by the neatness of the stacked wood inside. Each log was placed as if for show, he wrote, and yet everyone had a destiny in the fire. You understand what he meant. Every piece of wood represents hours of labor, hope, and planning. Each one has its turn in the flames, a moment to give its energy back to the world. As the fire burns brighter, you feel the cold retreat from the corners of the room. The frost on the window melts into beads that slide down the glass. The smell of sap mixes with smoke, sharp but sweet. You realize that for the pioneers, warmth was never taken for granted. It had to be earned daily, cut from the forest with hands that never rested. You watch the flames dance and think about the trees that once stood tall outside, now living a second life as light and heat. The fire hums softly, and you lean closer, letting the warmth kiss your face. The day stretches ahead, long and cold, but the woodpile is high, and for now, that is enough. Evening comes quietly, slipping through the trees with a faint shimmer of frost. The air outside turns blue with twilight, and the first thin thread of smoke curls upward from the cabin chimney. Inside, the fire glows steadily, its light soft and golden on the rough-hewn walls. The day's work is done, and now comes the careful ritual that will decide how warm the night will be. You can almost feel the shift in mood as the family settles into their nightly rhythm. Each movement has a purpose, every gesture practiced through long winters. According to the journals of frontier women, preparing for the night was nearly as important as preparing for the day. Before sleeping, the fire had to be banked. The mother or eldest child would take a long iron poker and push the glowing coals into a pile at the hearth's heart. Then, using a small shovel, they covered it with ashes to hold in the heat. The coals would smoulder through the night, hidden but alive, waiting to be stirred back to flame at dawn. In a world without matches, losing the fire meant more than inconvenience. It meant starting from nothing in the morning, cold. One curious domestic detail comes from a Pennsylvania farm journal that describes a family prayer said after banking the fire. Each night, they whispered, "Sleep, Ember, sleep, wake with us again." The phrase became so familiar that children sometimes mumbled it in their sleep, a charm against frost and darkness. You can imagine the soft glow on their faces as they whispered, their shadows long against the cabin wall. The rest of the evening unfolds with quiet simplicity. The father checks the door latch, making sure no wind can sneak through. The mother folds a quilt and places it by the hearth in case of emergency. The oldest son brings in a last armload of wood, just enough to spark the morning fire if the coals fail. The dog curls tighter beside the wall, his fur glinting orange in the firelight. Outside, the wind sighs softly against the logs, testing their strength, searching for a way in. Surviving diaries show that nightly routines like this were deeply ingrained in frontier families. The repetition brought comfort. Even when the world outside was harsh, these small acts made the cold predictable, almost manageable. A few settlers even marked their hearths with chalk lines, tiny protective symbols meant to keep away bad luck or wandering spirits. No one quite agreed where the superstition began, but many swore it worked. Perhaps belief itself was another kind of warmth. Some scholars argue that these rituals reflected an almost sacred relationship with the fire. Others view them as pure practicality, stripped of symbolism. Yet reading the accounts, it is hard not to sense reverence. Fire was more than a tool, it was a companion. Families spoke to it, tended it, trusted it. Losing it felt like losing a member of the household. When sparks leapt unexpectedly, or the smoke shifted in a strange way, people took it as a sign. The frontier blurred the line between survival and spirituality. One letter from a young woman in 1803 describes her favorite sound in winter, the soft hiss of the hearth when wet wood met glowing coals. She called it the cabin's sigh. It meant the day's labor was done and rest was near. The fire, in her words, was the only star we owned indoors. You picture that image, the orange light flickering across her tired face as she wrote by its glow, her fingers stained with ash. Inside the cabin, the family finishes their preparations. The mother lifts a small pot from the hearth and pours its warm contents into wooden mugs. The smell of cider and cinnamon fills the room. The children sip slowly, their eyelids heavy. The father leans back in his chair, boots off, eyes half closed. The flames sway in gentle rhythm, reflecting in the shiny metal of the kettle and the brass buttons of his coat. Every sound is amplified. The slow crackle of sap, the faint scrape of the wind against the roof, the whisper of breath from sleeping mouths. A lesser-known frontier custom involved setting a candle stub in a tin holder near the fire, its small light meant to guide dreams home. It was believed that those who drifted too far in sleep might lose their way and wake disoriented or ill. The candle's flicker, faint but steady, served as a reminder of safety. Whether anyone truly believed it or not, the soft light probably soothed more fears than they cared to admit. You move closer to the hearth and feel the pulse of warmth against your hands. The ash glows faintly, pink and gold, shifting like the heartbeat of the cabin itself. Outside, the forest sighs under the weight of snow. Inside, the walls hold the memory of countless nights just like this. The same gestures repeated, the same breath against the same cold. In this rhythm, time softens. You can almost imagine centuries collapsing into this one quiet moment. The room grows still. The fire hums softly, wrapped in its blanket of ash. You sit back and listen to the silence it creates. The world outside may be frozen, but inside, a handful of coals keep the promise of morning alive. The pioneers knew that survival was never a single act of courage. It was the slow persistence of ordinary rituals, repeated night after night until spring finally returned. You close your eyes and hear the faint echo of that whispered charm. Sleep, ember, sleep. The glow dims, the air cools, and the long winter night begins its patient watch once more. The morning arrives with the faintest touch of gold edging the snow outside. The air inside the cabin tastes of ash and warmth, a reminder that the fire survived the night. You sit up, shivering slightly, and glance toward the hearth. The ashes stir faintly, breathing like a sleeping animal. The father crouches there, his face calm and focused. With a practiced hand, he pokes the grey mound, exposing a few glowing coals beneath. A wisp of smoke rises. He adds a splinter of pine, then another, until the fire catches and a slow, lazy flame begins to lick at the new wood. That soft crackle feels like morning music. The smell of heat and smoke fills the cabin once more, blending with the scent of something sweet bubbling in a pot. Today, the family has a small treat, warm ale flavored with molasses and nutmeg. It is a thick, brown drink that clings to the lips and glows in the belly. You lift the cup to your face and inhale its sweetness. On mornings like this, ale replaces water, which would freeze solid before noon. Few people on the frontier trusted cold water in winter anyway. Too often it carried sickness, while ale, boiled and brewed, was safer and far more comforting. According to household notes from taverns and inns of the time, most settlers brewed their own low-strength ale or cider. It was not the strong drink of European pubs, but a mild, cloudy beverage that even children could sip. The brewing helped preserve fruit and grain, and the act of heating it before drinking made it feel like a small ceremony. In a land where warmth meant survival, every swallow was a reminder of life's fragile pleasures. One forgotten winter recipe found in a New Hampshire almanac describes a mixture of ale, beaten eggs, and sugar warmed by the fire. They called it flip. A red-hot iron was plunged into the mug to froth it instantly, filling the air with a sweet, smoky scent. The writer noted that it could raise a man's spirit even when the frost nips his beard. You imagine the hiss of the iron, the sudden burst of steam, the laughter that must have followed as people took their first hot sip. The warmth spreads slowly through your chest as you drink. Outside, the light grows brighter, reflecting off the snow so fiercely it makes the window glow. You can almost feel the contrast, that delicate balance between freezing world and heated hearth. On the frontier, warmth was not just physical, it was a way of reclaiming joy. Even the smallest comfort, a cup of ale or a spoonful of stew, became an act of quiet celebration. According to one traveller's diary from 1802, hospitality on the frontier was measured by the fire and the drink offered at dawn. A cold cabin was a lonely soul, he wrote, but a warm one greeted you with bread and a mug that smoked like heaven. It was a point of pride to share warmth with others, even if it meant less wood or drink for yourself. Those who refused were whispered about as cursed with miserliness, a trait believed to invite bad luck in the harsh seasons. Some cultural historians believe that this generosity stemmed from necessity. A family could survive a cold night alone, but not an entire winter without help from neighbors. Others see it as an inherited instinct from Europe, where communal fires once burned in village squares. Either way, the warmth of the hearth became more than heat. It was a symbol of community. To sit by someone's fire was to be accepted into their world. One curious note from a letter in 1815 mentions settlers in Ohio who mixed hot ale with crushed ginger and a pinch of black pepper to ward off colds. They called it winter tonic. Doctors at the time doubted its medical value, but families swore it kept frostbite and fevers at bay. You can imagine a grandmother insisting her children take a sip before heading out into the snow, her voice firm but kind. The fire crackles brighter now, and the cabin fills with a faint golden haze. The children laugh softly as they dip pieces of hard bread into the warm ale, their fingers red from the cold. The mother hums while stirring a pot of porridge. Even the dog perks up, nose twitching at the smell. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, thick and silent. Inside, the world glows. A few researchers have suggested that the daily ritual of tending fire and warming drink may have given frontier families a psychological anchor. The repetition offered comfort, something predictable in an unpredictable land. You can feel that truth now, in the steady rhythm of breath, in the pulse of flame reflected in every shiny surface. It feels like time itself slows to match the flicker of light. You finish your cup, the heat lingering in your throat. The cabin hums with life, every corner touched by warmth. For a moment, the cold outside feels like another world entirely. You can almost forget how fragile this balance is, how quickly a storm or a missing log could change everything. But for now, the fire burns. The air smells of sweet malt and smoke, and the taste of survival feels almost pleasant. You sit back, feeling your body relax, the warmth deep in your chest, and realize that in this frozen wilderness, comfort is not luxury. It is an act of courage repeated every morning, one ember and one sip at a time. The fire hums softly in the hearth, and the cabin air feels thick with the scent of wood smoke and warmth. Outside, the snow lies silent and perfect, muffling the forest into stillness. Inside, peace is interrupted by a sound every parent of the frontier knew too well, the cry of a child in the middle of the night. It begins as a small whimper, then rises into a soft wail that slices through the quiet like a bell. You open your eyes in the half-light, heart thudding, and watch the mother rise from the bed with practiced calm. She wraps her shawl tighter and moves to the cradle by the hearth. Contemporary accounts describe this moment as the hardest test of winter life. Babies did not understand the cold, only the discomfort. Many slept beside their mothers, tucked beneath heavy quilts for warmth. Others were placed in wooden cradles near the fire, wrapped in layers of wool and linen. The danger was constant. Too far from the heat, and the child might freeze. Too close, and the blanket could catch fire. Every parent learned to measure distance in inches, adjusting through long nights with half-closed eyes and frozen fingers. One lesser-known detail from letters written by pioneer women mentions that many mothers warmed small stones by the fire and wrapped them in cloth to place at the foot of a cradle. The heat would last for hours, keeping the baby's body warm even when the embers dimmed. A few women used baked potatoes or bricks for the same purpose, calling them sleep rocks. The trick required timing and instinct, balancing warmth against risk. You imagine the mother's hands testing the temperature carefully before setting one beside her child. The baby's cry softens as she whispers a lullaby, a tune older than this wilderness. The sound blends with the crackle of fire and the sighing wind outside. The melody has no words, just a rhythm that feels like breathing. You can almost hear the exhaustion in her voice and the tenderness that keeps her awake night after night. In that moment, the cabin is a cocoon of love and endurance, wrapped in flickering light and shadow. Records from early settlements show that infant mortality in frontier winters was heartbreakingly high. Cold was often the unseen enemy, slipping into cradles through cracks in the walls. Parents fought back with everything they had: layers of blankets, hot stones, even the warmth of their own bodies. Some mothers slept sitting up, holding their infants against their chests beneath shawls, using their own heat as a living blanket. The cost was exhaustion, but the reward was survival. A curious note found in a New York midwife's journal tells of a custom called night breath. Mothers would cup their hands and breathe warm air over their babies' faces before laying them down, believing that it gave the child a memory of heat that helped them rest. Modern science might scoff, but when you live surrounded by frost, every ritual matters. You can picture the soft glow of the firelight on the mother's face as she bends over her child, whispering warmth into the air. Some researchers suggest that these small nightly rituals created bonds of extraordinary closeness between parents and children on the frontier. Others see them as reflections of constant anxiety, a way to keep fear at bay through repetition. Both may be true. The sound of a baby crying in the cold must have been both a promise of life and a reminder of how fragile that life could be. Each night, families fought a quiet battle against the elements, one heartbeat at a time. The father stirs in his sleep but does not rise. His days are spent cutting wood, hunting, mending tools, and tending animals. His hands are raw, his face windburned, his body sore. The mother's work never ends either. By day she cooks, sews, and gathers, and by night she keeps the fire alive and the children warm. You can feel the quiet heroism of these moments, the endless endurance hidden beneath the ordinary. A surviving diary from 1812 describes one such night. The writer, a teenage girl, tells of her baby brother crying until their mother lifted him into bed beside her. He slept in her arm, his head near her heart, she wrote. By morning the frost was on the wall, but he smiled in his sleep. You can see that image so clearly, the warmth of skin against skin, the glow of firelight across a sleeping face, and the cold world held back for one more night. The baby in the cabin finally drifts back to sleep. The mother rocks the cradle gently, her eyes half closed. The fire flickers low, painting her shadow across the wall. You listen to the sounds, the small sigh of the child, the slow breathing of the others, the faint whisper of snow sliding off the roof outside. The room smells of life, of wool and wood and milk, of humanity surviving in the simplest, most beautiful way. You lie back down and pull the blanket up, feeling a strange peace settle over you. In this place, every cry answered, every ember tended, is an act of defiance against the wilderness. The pioneers did not conquer the cold through strength alone. They met it with tenderness, with patience, with hands that refused to stop giving warmth. The night continues, slow and deep, and the mother finally closes her eyes, her child safe in the cradle beside her. The fire hums its lullaby once more, and the cabin dreams along with them. The next evening arrives with a thin silver moon hanging above the forest, its light glimmering faintly through the frost-rimmed window. Inside the cabin, the fire burns steady but low, just enough to cast a soft orange halo across the room. The air carries a mix of warmth and cold, like two invisible hands meeting in the middle. You can smell wool, pine smoke, and the faint sweetness of bread baking near the coals. The day's work is done, and the family begins its nightly routine again. But tonight you notice something different. They are deciding what to wear to bed, and the debate is more serious than you would ever expect. Letters from settlers and soldiers alike reveal that early Americans often argued about whether sleeping clothed or naked kept them warmer in winter. Some believed that wearing layers trapped body heat and kept the cold from creeping in. Others insisted that sleeping without clothes allowed the blankets to absorb and reflect heat more efficiently. In a world without reliable insulation, this question was more than preference. It was a matter of survival. Each household had its own answer, shaped by habit, superstition, and experience. One curious detail appears in a farm wife's diary from 1810. She wrote that her husband slept as the Lord made him, believing that woolen garments at night made a person sweat and freeze both. She, on the other hand, wore 2 shifts and stockings to bed and claimed to wake warmer than he did. Their friendly argument lasted through an entire winter, recorded in affectionate complaints written between notes about bread recipes and chores. You can almost hear their laughter echoing through the log walls, a spark of warmth in the frozen dark. According to surviving records from frontier tailors, most families kept one set of sleeping clothes for the entire cold season. These were not elegant garments, but layers of flannel or linen stitched by hand. Some people even slept in the same wool socks they wore outdoors, the heels darned again and again. For children, mothers often sewed long nightgowns with small hoods attached, like makeshift sleeping bags. They called them sleeping sacks. The garments kept in body heat and offered a small sense of comfort when the cold pressed close. Researchers continue to discuss whether these practices made a real difference. Some argue that the thick wool trapped sweat, which then cooled against the skin, making the sleeper colder by morning. Others point to diaries describing how the extra layers saved people from frostbite during extreme storms. Perhaps the truth depended on the individual, on the kind of blanket, or on the strength of the fire. Either way, the ritual of dressing for sleep carried an almost ceremonial air, a small negotiation between comfort and danger. One forgotten anecdote from a Kentucky homestead describes a father who insisted everyone sleep in their day clothes during a blizzard, ready to run if the roof fell or the wolves came. His daughter later recalled waking to the sound of the wind howling through the cracks and feeling reassured by the rough weight of her coat. She wrote that she dreamed of warmth in the arms of the storm. The memory stayed with her even as an old woman, proof that security often mattered more than comfort. Inside the cabin, the scene feels intimate and familiar. The mother unlaces her boots by the fire and sets them beside the hearth to dry. The father rolls up his sleeves, rubbing his hands together before slipping into a heavy wool shirt. The children tug at their stockings, giggling sleepily as they crawl under the quilts. Each movement feels deliberate, shaped by years of repetition. The room glows faintly, full of small sounds, the rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed, the quiet sigh of wood settling in the heat. You lie down and feel the coarse fabric of your own clothes against your skin. The wool itches slightly, but the warmth builds fast. The blanket feels heavier tonight, a familiar weight pressing you into the straw mattress. Outside, the wind begins to rise, whispering through the trees, brushing softly against the cabin walls. The flicker of the fire paints fleeting shadows that dance across the ceiling like slow-moving ghosts. According to one traveler's notes from 1806, a good blanket was worth more than silver in some parts of the frontier. Families traded furs, tools, and even livestock for thick quilts or imported woolen covers. Women took great pride in making patchwork quilts, not just for beauty but for survival. Each layer of fabric added a little more life to the night. A family with 3 or 4 quilts was considered fortunate. You can imagine them piled high, the colors dulled by smoke and use, yet each one stitched with care. The conversation in the cabin fades to whispers. The father teases his wife about her extra layers. She laughs and tells him he will regret his pride by morning. The children are already half asleep, murmuring dreams into the dark. The fire pops, scattering tiny sparks that fade before touching the floor. You listen to the sound of breathing, of blankets rustling, of the wind testing the roof. The world feels balanced on the edge of warmth and cold, and somehow you belong to both. A scholar once suggested that these nightly routines were less about science and more about control. The pioneers could not change the weather, but they could decide how to face it. Choosing what to wear to bed was a quiet act of rebellion, a way of saying, "We will not yield." You can feel that defiance in the stillness of the room, in the weight of the quilts, in the whisper of the fire. The cabin sighs softly, and sleep settles over everyone like another layer of cloth. Outside, the moonlight glints off the snow, cold and merciless, but inside, the warmth holds. You close your eyes and drift, half dreaming, wrapped in fabric, history, and the stubborn warmth of human will. You wake in the dark, unsure of what time it is. The fire has dimmed to a faint red glow, and the air carries a sharp bite that makes your breath visible. The cabin feels smaller at night, every sound amplified. The logs creak softly as they adjust to the cold. The wind sighs at the corners, and something outside scratches faintly at the snow. For a few seconds, you lie still, listening. Then, a quiet motion near the hearth catches your eye. The father has risen, wrapped in a wool coat, moving like a shadow toward the embers. It is his turn to tend the fire. Frontier life followed a rhythm that ignored the clock. Nights were long, and the fire could not be left alone. Families took turns rising every few hours to stoke the embers, add a few logs, and check the room for drafts. This was the midnight watch, a duty shared by everyone old enough to handle a poker. The person who woke for it often did so by instinct, stirred by the sudden cold creeping into the blankets. You can imagine the quiet determination of those moments, when the whole world seems to sleep except you and the whispering coals. According to notes in a settler's journal from 809, the one who tended the fire at night was often called the keeper. Their task went beyond warmth. It was symbolic, a kind of guardianship. The writer described the hush of those hours, the sound of logs cracking softly, and the strange comfort of solitude. He wrote, "To watch the fire is to feel the breath of life itself." The line feels almost poetic, as if the act of feeding flame was a prayer. One curious detail from family letters tells that many pioneers used this quiet time to think or pray. Some mended clothes by candlelight, others whittled small toys or tools while waiting for the fire to brighten. It was the only solitude most people ever had, a thin slice of silence between the demands of day and the noise of family life. A few even used the time to write, recording the day's events in small journals, their ink thick from the chill. You watch the father crouch by the hearth. He brushes aside the ash, exposing the glowing heart beneath. His breath catches in the cold as he leans close to blow gently, coaxing the coals to life. A thin orange tongue of flame appears, flickers, and then steadies. He adds a small log, waits, and adds another. The wood catches slowly, the sound like the soft cracking of ice. The air begins to shift, the chill retreating just a little. The glow spreads across his face, warm and golden, as if the fire itself recognizes him. According to contemporary records from fur traders and frontier posts, the watchkeeper often used this hour to step outside and check the sky. Stars were the only clock that mattered, and the brightness of Orion or the North Star told how deep into the night they were. The cold outside was brutal, yet some claimed to find beauty in it. They spoke of skies so clear that the stars seemed close enough to touch, and snow that glowed like powdered glass. It was a moment to feel both small and infinite at once. One lesser-known story tells of a woman in the Great Lakes region who claimed to hear the voices of wolves while tending the fire at night. She said their howls were like distant prayers, echoing through the trees. Whether out of fear or fascination, she always answered by tossing an extra log into the flames, as if offering the creatures her own kind of blessing. Her descendants remembered the habit generations later, calling it feeding the wild. Some historians believe the midnight watch fostered a quiet resilience among pioneers. It demanded awareness, patience, and care. Others view it as a source of exhaustion, a constant interruption in the already limited rest of frontier life. Yet reading their letters, you sense that many took pride in it. To wake and find the fire still breathing was proof that they had done something right. Each successful night was another victory against the cold. Inside the cabin, the fire burns brighter now. The light stretches across the floor, touching the rough edges of furniture, the sleeping faces of the children, the gentle rise and fall of the dog's chest. The father sits for a while, rubbing his hands near the warmth, eyes unfocused. Perhaps he is thinking of the woods he will cut tomorrow, or the fence that needs repair, or maybe nothing at all. The silence itself is enough. He leans back, closes his eyes for a moment, then stands and pulls the quilt tighter around the cradle. The sound of the fire fills the space like a heartbeat. You can hear the slow rhythm of the flames licking the wood, the low sigh of heat moving through the room. Outside, the wind presses against the walls, defeated for now. The man stretches once, then slips quietly back into bed beside his wife. Within moments, the steady rhythm of their breathing joins the hush of the cabin. The light flickers and steadies, and the house settles into warmth again. A scholar once remarked that the pioneers lived by firelight and died by it too. The phrase lingers as you listen to the soft crackle of the embers. In this frozen world, the fire is both comfort and companion, fragile and eternal. To wake in the night and tend it is not just duty, it is connection, an unbroken chain of care stretching through centuries. The cabin sighs, the flames pulse softly, and the long night continues, watched over by a single patient soul who refuses to let the warmth die. By the time daylight filters through the cracks of the cabin walls, the air smells faintly of wood smoke and bread. The family begins to stir, stretching and blinking in the pale light. The fire burns low but steady, and the coals glow like buried treasure. You hear the soft rustle of fabric, the creak of bed frames, and the shuffling of boots across the floor. Then, a sound breaks the rhythm of morning. A knock at the door. It is slow, hesitant, muffled by the snow outside. The father rises, his breath forming clouds in the cold air, and lifts the latch. A stranger stands there, wrapped in a heavy coat dusted with frost. Frontier diaries are full of such moments. Travelers often appeared without warning, seeking food, shelter, or simply a night's warmth. Hospitality was not just a virtue, it was a rule of survival. To refuse a traveler could mean condemning them to death in the frozen wilderness, and few pioneers could bear that thought. Every knock carried both risk and obligation, for the visitor might be friend, messenger, or danger. Yet doors still opened, fires still shared, and beds still rearranged to make room for one more. According to entries from an Illinois settler's journal in 1821, a family's reputation in winter was built on how they treated travelers. "A warm hearth makes a warm name," he wrote, noting that those who shared what little they had were remembered for generations. Guests were fed first, seated nearest the fire, and given the softest spot on the bed or floor. Even when supplies ran low, a cup of hot broth or cider was offered as a sign of humanity. You can feel the weight of that tradition, the simple act of kindness against the cold. One curious practice, recorded in rural New England, involved using a phrase instead of a formal invitation. When a traveler arrived, the host would say, "Come warm yourself." It meant more than comfort. It was a promise of safety. The fire, food, and bed were all included in those 3 words. In return, guests often brought small gifts, a pinch of salt, a few matches, or a story from the road. In a land where isolation was constant, a story could be as precious as gold. The father steps aside and lets the stranger in. The man's face is red from the wind, his eyelashes dusted with frost. He removes his hat and nods a silent thank you. The room fills with the sound of snow melting from his coat, dripping softly onto the floorboards. The mother hands him a mug of hot cider, and his shaking hands cradle it like something holy. Steam rises, curling through the cold air. The children watch from the bed, eyes wide, both curious and cautious. The family dog lifts its head, sniffing before curling back down by the hearth. Contemporary letters from travelers describe the profound relief of entering a warm cabin after days in the wilderness. One man wrote, "To step through that door was to step from death into life." The frontier was not kind to those who traveled alone. Frozen rivers, sudden storms, and wild animals claimed countless lives each winter. Yet within the humble walls of a cabin, strangers became kin for a night. You can sense the quiet gratitude in the air, the wordless understanding between host and guest. A lesser-known custom mentioned in oral histories involved giving the visitor the fireside of the bed, the place closest to the hearth. Families would crowd toward the wall, sacrificing their own comfort so the newcomer could thaw out. Sometimes, if space was too tight, people slept sitting up, shoulders touching, blankets shared among all. Privacy did not exist, but generosity did. The firelight turned strangers into a single circle of warmth. Some historians have debated whether this hospitality was purely moral or rooted in practical necessity. Sharing a fire also meant sharing labor, information, and protection. A traveler might carry news of nearby settlements or warn of dangers ahead. A friendly household could gain allies simply by opening their door. Yet beyond logic, there seems to have been something deeper, a recognition that in a world ruled by cold, compassion itself was a source of heat. One remarkable letter from 1808 describes a blizzard night in which 5 travelers crammed into a single cabin with a family of 6. They slept side by side on the floor, covered by every blanket and hide available. It was like a nest of hearts, the letter reads, no space left for the cold to enter. The phrasing stays with you. You can almost feel that closeness, the heavy warmth of breath and bodies, the shared understanding that they would face the storm together. Back in the cabin, the stranger's face softens as he finishes his cider. He reaches into his coat and offers a small piece of dried fruit to the youngest child, who takes it shyly. The father nods once, satisfied, and begins to stir the embers for the evening meal. Conversation starts slowly, but soon the room hums with gentle voices. The visitor tells of icy rivers, of wolves seen on the ridge, of a town 3 days' ride away. His words carry the sound of distance, yet they make this little cabin feel larger, connected to a world beyond the snow. The night deepens, and when the fire is finally banked, the family makes room for him beside it. Blankets are spread, and the stranger lies down, eyes closing almost immediately. The air is still, except for the faint crackle of embers and the steady breathing of those asleep. In this small space, the boundaries between host and guest vanish. There is only warmth, only life preserved for another dawn. You realize that on this frozen frontier, survival is a shared act, and kindness is the only fire that never goes out. The snow outside glows blue in the pale morning light. Inside, the air feels warmer, softer, filled with the smell of smoke, boiled cornmeal, and wool. The stranger who came in last night is gone, leaving only a faint trail of footprints leading toward the woods. The father watches through the window for a moment before turning back to the fire. Life in the cabin moves on, quiet and steady. The mother has already started her work, her hands moving quickly, spinning wool on a small wooden wheel near the hearth. The rhythmic whir fills the room like a lullaby. According to the journals of frontier women, winter days were their hardest and most productive time. When fields froze and animals huddled in barns, the work moved indoors. Women mended clothes, spun yarn, and sewed quilts until their fingers ached. Each thread meant warmth, each stitch a small act of love disguised as labor. Clothing could not be bought easily, and new fabric was a luxury reserved for townsfolk. Everything here had to be made from what was on hand: sheep's wool, flax, scraps of linen or fur. The rhythm of survival was measured by the turn of a spindle and the sound of a needle-piercing cloth. One remarkable account from a settler's wife in Ohio describes her winter routine in detail. "I spin from dawn until I can no longer see my hands," she wrote, "and pray that the children's stockings last through March." She listed every item made that season: shirts, mittens, quilts, and patched trousers. There was pride in her exhaustion. The act of creation gave her control over a world that often felt uncontrollable. You can almost picture her sitting in the golden light of the fire, surrounded by curls of wool and scraps of cloth, her face illuminated by the quiet determination of necessity. A curious domestic custom mentioned in oral histories involves using old clothing to reinforce windows and doors. Women would cut strips from worn-out garments and stuff them into cracks, or nail whole sleeves across gaps where the wind slipped in. Children sometimes wore their father's coats at night, the sleeves dragging behind them like cloaks. Nothing was wasted. When a blanket tore, it became a quilt. When a quilt frayed, it became padding for shoes. When even that wore out, it was burned for fuel. Waste was a sin against the cold. According to trade records from early settlements, sewing needles were among the most prized possessions in a frontier household. A good needle could last for years if cleaned and kept dry. Women sometimes shared them among neighbors, passing them around like sacred tools. When one broke, it was buried near the hearth, a gesture of respect that carried echoes of old European traditions. You can imagine the quiet moment when a needle snapped mid-stitch, and the seamstress sighed before carefully placing it aside. Her work briefly paused, but never stopped. One forgotten detail from the letters of a preacher's wife describes how women gathered in small groups during winter, carrying their spinning wheels from cabin to cabin. They called it a spinning frolic. These gatherings were part labor, part fellowship, and part rebellion against isolation. The women sang softly while working, their voices blending with the hum of the wheels. Sometimes a neighbor's husband would play the fiddle, filling the room with warmth that even the fire could not match. You can hear that sound now if you listen closely: the steady whir of spinning, the soft laughter, the rhythmic tapping of feet against the wooden floor. Scholars have often noted that such gatherings served as emotional anchors for women who rarely left their homes. The constant work of survival left little space for leisure, yet these moments of shared labor created small pockets of joy. It was through these gatherings that news spread, that babies were planned for, and that grief was soothed. A spool of thread became a bridge between lives. The mother in this cabin hums a tune as she works. Her hands are quick and sure, pulling the wool into thin, silvery strands before feeding it to the spindle. The thread tightens with a soft sigh. Beside her, the children cut scraps of fabric for patchwork. The oldest daughter is already learning to sew straight lines, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she concentrates. The father mends a harness near the fire, his big hands moving carefully, the leather creaking with each pull of the thread. The dog sleeps, tail twitching. The whole cabin hums with quiet purpose. One small artifact from a museum in Kentucky displays a child's quilt from 1820 stitched with initials and tiny symbols, hearts, leaves, and stars. The label explains that such symbols often carried wishes for protection and endurance. The hearts meant love, the leaves meant renewal, the stars guidance. These pieces of fabric were not just blankets, but stories sewn in thread. When laid over a sleeping child, they wrapped that child in both warmth and memory. You look around the cabin and realize that everything around you has been touched by a woman's hands. Every blanket, every curtain, every repaired shirt carries her signature in the stitches. Her labor fills the air like an invisible weave, binding the family together. Outside, the wind moans across the snow, but inside, the rhythm of spinning and sewing continues, steady and alive. The thread stretches from her hands into the fabric of the room, connecting past to present, hardship to hope. The wheel spins, the fire glows, and time moves in gentle circles, warm against the cold that presses at the door. The wind outside carries the scent of pine and snow. The cabin walls groan quietly under the cold, but inside, life continues with its steady rhythm. You notice movement near the corner of the room. A small door opens with a low creak, revealing a shadowed space beyond the hearth. The faint sound of hooves and soft snuffling fills the air. For a moment, you think an animal has wandered too close, but then you realize the truth. The animals are inside on purpose. According to farm records from the early 1800s, many settlers brought small livestock into their cabins during the coldest months. Goats, chickens, pigs, and sometimes even calves were given shelter alongside the family. It was not out of affection but necessity. A cow or pig could freeze to death in a single night, and their warmth, in turn, could help the humans survive. The arrangement was uncomfortable but practical, a shared agreement between species bound by the same winter. One curious note in a Vermont farmer's journal from 1807 describes a cow named Daisy who slept like a sister beside the hearth through 3 winters. Her body heat, he wrote, made the cabin a church of life. The words feel strange but sincere. You can imagine that presence, the slow, steady breathing of an animal, the faint smell of hay mixing with the smoke of the fire. It is not luxury, but companionship of the most elemental kind. The room carries that mixture of warmth and odor now, damp straw, smoke, sweat, and the sharp sweetness of livestock. The air is thick, alive with the smell of survival. The mother does not complain. She spreads fresh straw near the hearth and hums softly as she works. The children giggle when a chicken flutters onto a stool, feathers glowing in the firelight. The father wipes his brow and closes the small door again, trapping the warmth before it escapes. Accounts from settlers in the Appalachian region confirm that animals were often housed in small pens, attached directly to the main living space. These pens were made of split logs or woven branches, designed to contain the animals but still allow heat to pass through. At night, the sounds of lowing cattle or grunting pigs became part of the household symphony. A restless cow could wake the baby. A rooster might crow long before dawn. Sleep came in fragments, but no one complained. Warmth was worth the noise. A lesser-known domestic trick mentioned in rural letters was the use of wool blankets or old coats to cover animals indoors. Farmers wrote of draping cloth over calves or lambs like makeshift jackets. Children often took turns caring for them, feeding and brushing them as part of their chores. The animals in turn seemed calmer, and their heat kept the air inside just a little less bitter. It was an unspoken alliance between humans and creatures who endured the same relentless cold. Some social historians have debated how this arrangement affected family life. Did the constant closeness to animals blur the lines between wild and domestic? Some suggest it deepened empathy, teaching children that all living things shared the same struggle. Others argue that it hardened people to the smells and discomforts of necessity. Reading the letters of that time, you sense both truths. The pioneers were tender and practical at once, finding dignity even in mud and manure. One traveller's note from 1,819 recounts entering a log cabin near the Missouri River and being startled to find a piglet curled by the fire. The host laughed and told him, "That little one keeps the devil of the frost from our feet." The traveller admitted that by morning, he too had grown fond of the pig. Small moments like this reveal the humour and resilience that made survival possible. You picture the scene clearly now. The family sits by the hearth, eating their evening meal of corn mush and dried apples. The cow shifts softly in her pen, her dark eyes calm and reflective in the firelight. A hen rustles in the straw. The dog stretches beside the children, his tail thumping once against the floor. The air hums with warmth and breath and life, a fragile harmony held together by necessity. According to agricultural accounts, this closeness between human and animal shaped the rhythm of frontier winters. Chores never stopped, even after dark. The family rose before dawn to milk the cow, feed the chickens, and sweep the floor clean. Children learned early that survival was a shared task. The animals depended on them, and they depended on the animals. The cycle was intimate, continuous, and oddly comforting. You sit by the fire, watching the glow reflect off the cow's flank. Her breathing syncs with the flicker of the flames. The family is quiet now, the children already half asleep, the parents whispering softly about tomorrow's work. Outside, snow drifts against the cabin walls, sealing them in like a protective cocoon. Inside, the air is warm, filled with the gentle rhythm of life. You close your eyes and listen. The fire crackles, a cow sighs, and somewhere in that mingled sound, you can hear the heartbeat of a world that refused to freeze. Night returns quietly, blanketing the forest in stillness. The cold presses harder now, and the air outside glitters under the moon like powdered glass. Inside the cabin, the fire burns low, its glow trembling across the rough timber walls. You sit close to the hearth, letting the heat soak into your skin, and listen. The cabin has its own music at night. It is not silence exactly, but a tapestry of small sounds that remind you the world is still alive even in deep cold. According to early travelers' journals, people who spent winters in log cabins often spoke of the sounds that shaped their nights. The wood itself seemed to breathe. As the temperature dropped, the logs contracted with small groans, the nails creaked, and the wind whistled through seams too fine to see. Mice scurried between floorboards, and sometimes, if you listened long enough, you could hear snow sliding off the roof with a muffled sigh. The noises frightened newcomers at first. Then, over time, they became familiar, almost soothing, like the heartbeat of the home. One lesser-known recollection from a trapper's letter describes the sound of trees cracking outside during extreme cold. He wrote that the forest sounded like rifle fire at dawn. The sap inside the trees froze and expanded until the trunks split with a sharp report that echoed through the valley. Those who lived in the cabins grew used to it, though the first few times always made hearts jump. The night could roar and whisper in turns, reminding them how small their walls really were. The family inside this cabin lies awake, listening. The father's hand rests on the dog's back, feeling the slow rhythm of its breathing. The mother stirs faintly, tucking the quilt higher around the children. The wind picks up again, brushing against the roof like invisible fingers. You can hear the faint rattle of dried herbs hanging near the hearth, their stems tapping softly together. The sound is delicate, like glass beads in a slow dance. Every creak, every sigh, every flutter of ash feels alive, part of the strange harmony that fills this tiny world. According to diaries from settlers in Pennsylvania and Ohio, the first winter in a cabin often felt haunted. Many families described lying awake for hours, convinced they heard voices in the wind or footsteps in the snow. Some believed the forest itself watched them, ancient and patient. Over time, those fears faded, replaced by a kind of companionship. The noises became reminders that the structure was holding, that life still moved beyond the walls. One curious entry from a preacher's journal in 1812 tells of a family who kept a small bell by the bed to ring if they heard wolves too close to the cabin. The sound was meant to scare the animals, though the preacher admitted it mostly reassured the humans. He called it faith against fear. You can almost imagine that little bell ringing once, sharp and bright, echoing into the night like a fragile promise that everything would be all right. Some modern researchers suggest that these nightly sounds helped pioneers cope with isolation. Listening became a form of connection, a way to measure the world without leaving their beds. Others argue that the constant creaks and howls made sleep uneasy and restless. But if you stand here long enough, you understand why they endured it. The noises mean life continues. Silence would mean the fire is out, the walls have given way, or worse, that no one is left to listen. The fire pops, sending a small shower of sparks into the air. The light flickers across the ceiling, and shadows shift like waves. A log collapses inward, sending a rush of heat across your face. You close your eyes and let the rhythm of sound pull you deeper into the night. Somewhere outside, an owl hoots, distant and calm. The sound echoes faintly before fading into the forest's heavy quiet. A letter from a frontier mother captures this feeling perfectly. She wrote, "The nights are never still, yet I find peace in their talk." Her words capture something beyond survival. They describe belonging, an understanding that to live in the wilderness meant learning to share the dark with its voices. The pioneers were never alone, not truly. The wind, the fire, the wood, they spoke constantly, if you learned how to listen. Inside the cabin, the sounds weave together. The low murmur of the fire, the deep breathing of sleepers, the faint whisper of the wind through the chimney. It feels almost like a song, one that repeats endlessly from night to night. You let your own breathing match its tempo, slow and calm. The fear of the wild fades, replaced by quiet awe. This is the heartbeat of survival, steady and human, hidden inside the endless cold. The cabin may be small, but its sounds stretch wide as the sky. You close your eyes, the fire hums, and the night holds you gently in its arms. The snow outside is thick enough to bury footprints almost as soon as they appear. The world is wrapped in silence and glittering white. Inside the cabin, the air is warm but heavy, the smell of smoke clinging to everything like a second skin. The family moves slowly through the morning light. The mother opens the door to fetch water and gasps as the cold hits her face like a wall. She notices something strange. The snow along the lower logs of the cabin is packed tight, rising almost halfway up the walls. It looks like the house is sinking into the earth, but she smiles instead of worrying. She knows that the snow will help keep them warm. According to period accounts from settlers across the northern frontier, heavy snowfall was not always a curse. In fact, many families welcomed it as a natural form of insulation. When snow drifted high against the cabin walls, it sealed the cracks and blocked the wind. The compacted snow acted like a blanket, trapping the heat that leaked from inside. The pioneers called this effect snowbanking. What seemed like suffocation from the outside was, in truth, protection. The deeper the snow piled, the cozier the cabin became. One curious observation from a Norwegian immigrant in Wisconsin explains that this trick came from old mountain traditions in Europe. He wrote, "When the house grows smaller, the hearts grow warmer." The settlers brought that wisdom with them across the ocean, and it followed them into the new wilderness. It was a gift of nature that turned an enemy into an ally. You can picture it now, the cabin buried up to its windows, glowing faintly through the snow like a lantern under glass. Inside, the family adjusts to the dimmer light. The windows are half covered, letting in only soft blue reflections. The air feels still, muffled, like sound itself is caught in the snow outside. The father moves the chairs closer to the fire, and the mother shakes out the blankets to catch the faint warmth that lingers in the air. The children press their hands to the walls, giggling at how cold the logs feel from the inside. You can almost feel the difference yourself, the strange balance of cold and warmth separated by only inches of wood and frozen air. Contemporary letters from settlers reveal how they learned to use the snow deliberately. When storms came, families shoveled drifts against the base of the cabin to keep out drafts. They packed it firmly with shovels or bare hands, until the house looked like part of the landscape. In the far north, some even cut blocks of snow to create windbreaks around doors and chimneys. To live with the cold meant learning to shape it, to turn the very substance of hardship into a tool for survival. A forgotten trick mentioned in the Journal of a Trapper describes melting snow along the roofline to seal leaks. He would heat stones in the fire and place them carefully at the base of the roof, allowing the rising heat to melt just enough snow to form a thin layer of ice. When it froze again, the ice acted like a shield, deflecting wind and water. It was crude science, improvised engineering born from necessity. The result was a roof that creaked but rarely leaked. Some environmental historians have pointed out that these practices blurred the line between natural and artificial shelter. The pioneers did not simply fight the weather, they collaborated with it. Others argue that this cooperation came less from philosophy and more from desperation. Either way, the relationship between people and snow was one of uneasy respect. The same drift that warmed the cabin could also trap it completely, cutting families off for weeks. But they preferred that silence to the piercing wind. You glance out through the small window. The world is dazzling and bright. The snow outside reflects the sun, turning everything white and gold. The cabin's shape is softened, almost hidden beneath its frozen armor. You imagine how quiet the forest must be. No footsteps, no creaks from the trees, only the faint sound of a branch shedding snow in the distance. Inside, it feels like time itself has slowed. The flames move lazily, the smoke curling gently upward, the air thick and still. According to one New Hampshire woman's winter diary, she found comfort in that deep quiet. "The snow holds us like a mother's hand," she wrote, "and though we are prisoners, we are safe." Her words capture the strange duality of those winters, confinement and comfort living side by side. Outside was danger and emptiness. Inside, warmth, love, and the steady patience of endurance. The family sits together now, their faces rosy from the fire. The father sips from a mug of warm cider, the mother knits with her lap full of wool, and the children press their palms against the window to see their foggy handprints appear. The snow outside glows faintly in the afternoon light, turning from white to silver. The cabin feels sealed against the world, like a ship drifting quietly through an ocean of ice. One last sound breaks the stillness, a soft, rhythmic drip from the eaves. The fire has made the snow on the roof begin to melt, and tiny droplets fall onto the packed drifts below. Each drop lands with a gentle click, steady and reassuring. The mother smiles when she hears it. It means the fire is strong, the roof is holding, and life inside continues. The snow may rule the world outside, but within these walls, warmth and will have found a fragile peace. You lean back and let your eyes close, listening to that slow, perfect rhythm. Drip, crackle, breath, heartbeat. The sounds blur into one, and you can feel the deep contentment that comes from surviving another night, another storm, another winter. The cabin may be buried in white silence, but inside, it glows with life, steady and sure. The morning smells of smoke, wool, and something faintly sweet, like apples stored too long in a barrel. The air inside the cabin feels thick with life. You can taste it when you breathe. Your hands are sticky with resin from the firewood, your clothes smell of ash, and the scent clings to everything you own. It is the fragrance of survival, stubborn and comforting. The pioneers did not live in a world of freshness or perfume. They lived in the rich odor of what kept them alive. According to letters written by settlers in the early 1800s, the smell of a log cabin in winter was unforgettable. It was a mixture of burning wood, tallow candles, damp wool, and sweat. The walls absorbed the smoke, staining the logs dark brown over time, until even the light that filtered through the window felt amber. Some visitors from the cities complained about the heaviness of frontier air, but for those who lived here, it was the smell of warmth, of work, of home. One curious note from an herbalist's diary in 1805 describes how women used natural scents to fight the staleness of cabin life. They hung bunches of dried herbs above the hearth: sage, mint, lavender, sometimes apple peels strung on twine. The heat released their fragrance slowly, masking the odors of cooking and livestock. Some even scattered pine needles on the floor, crushing them underfoot to freshen the air. The writer claimed that a good house smells of smoke and thyme, a philosophy that could only belong to people who had made peace with the earth. The fire crackles as another log settles. The smoke curls upward, brushing the rough stones of the chimney before vanishing into the air. The smell is sharp but pleasant, the kind that lingers in hair and blankets for days. The children sit near the hearth, roasting bits of cornbread on sticks, their faces smudged with soot. The mother wipes flour from her hands and fans the air with her apron. The father sits quietly, sharpening a knife, his clothes stiff from sweat and ash. You can almost hear the scrape of the blade, rhythmic and sure. According to household inventories from frontier settlements, soap was a rare commodity during long winters. Many families made their own from animal fat and wood ash, stored in clay crocks near the hearth. The scent of this soap was strong and earthy, not the floral kind we know today. Washing clothes or skin filled the room with a strange combination of cleanliness and smoke. In a season when water froze solid by morning, washing was an act of both effort and courage. One forgotten custom among mountain families involved fumigating cabins during deep winter. They burned handfuls of juniper branches or dried cedar on the hearth to drive away sickness and unpleasant odors. The practice came from older European folk medicine, mixed with native traditions. The air would fill with fragrant smoke that stung the eyes but cleared the lungs. Afterward, the cabin smelled like a forest fire, clean and wild. You can almost imagine that scent now, heavy with pine resin and a faint sweetness beneath. Some researchers believe that these smells shaped memory more deeply than sight or sound. Settlers who later moved to towns often wrote that the smell of wood smoke brought them instantly back to their childhood winters. Others described it as a perfume of endurance, a sensory link to hardship overcome. The historian Laurel Kent once called it the scent of courage preserved in ash. Perhaps she was right. In this place, smell was not decoration. It was a language. The family sits down to their meal. The mother ladles stew from the pot, the rich aroma of venison and onion filling the air. The children eat quietly, steam rising from their bowls. The father leans back, eyes half closed, listening to the wind outside. The combination of smells: meat, smoke, wet wool, apples drying by the fire wraps the room in a thick, invisible blanket. You realize that warmth is not just temperature. It is texture, scent, and familiarity. It is knowing this exact mixture means you are safe for another night. One traveller from England wrote in his 1823 journal that every cabin he entered had its own breath. He described the smell of smoke that seemed to cling to the people themselves, even when they visited town. He said he could always tell a frontier family by their scent. To him it was foreign, but to them it was identity. They carried the story of their fires wherever they went. The fire flares briefly, and a gust of smoke rolls through the room before escaping through the chimney. It fills your throat, rough but oddly comforting. The air vibrates faintly with the hum of the flames and the sound of fabric rustling as the family moves around the small space. You can sense the life inside these smells. The labor, the meals, the laughter, the exhaustion. The cabin breathes it all in and gives it back again. Outside, the snow glows under the afternoon sun, blindingly white against the dark line of trees. Inside, everything is golden and dim, softened by the smoke that drifts through the air. You sit back, breathing slowly, and let the scents settle in your memory. Smoke, sweat, wool, and faint sweetness. It is not pleasant by modern measure, but it feels human, raw, and real. This is the perfume of survival, a mixture that tells you belong here. The fire sighs again, and the cabin fills with its pulse, smelling of life that refuses to fade. The afternoon light filters through the greased paper window, soft and hazy, painting the room in amber tones. The fire burns low, steady but quiet, as if resting after a long morning's work. The air feels heavy, rich with smoke and warmth. You sit on a small stool, staring at the slow dance of light against the logs. Outside, the forest stands still, its branches dusted with snow, the world silent except for the faint call of a crow far away. Inside the cabin, you feel time stretch and slow, folding in on itself like the rhythm of breathing. According to the surviving letters of early pioneers, winter afternoons were often the quietest moments of the day. Work paused for a few precious hours, giving families a chance to rest and reflect. Many settlers described this time as the soft hour, a brief interlude between labor and nightfall when the fire glowed brightest and memories of home felt nearest. It was then that thoughts turned inward, drifting toward the lives left behind across the sea or in the distant towns they would never see again. One letter from a young woman who emigrated from Ireland in 1802 describes sitting by the fire with her sewing while thinking of her mother's hearth back home. She wrote, "The air here smells of new pine, not turf, yet the smoke curls the same way." Her words carry both longing and peace, the delicate balance of someone learning to belong in two places at once. You can imagine her face lit by firelight, her hands moving slowly, the soft ache of memory filling the space between each stitch. The cabin itself feels alive with these echoes. Every family carried their own ghosts of home, not in sorrow but in memory's comfort. The songs sung quietly before sleep, the stories told in half-whisper to restless children, the familiar prayers murmured by the hearth, all were threads connecting past and present. The fire became a bridge between worlds, burning both here and there, between what was lost and what had to be built anew. According to travel accounts from merchants visiting frontier communities, many cabins were decorated not with wealth, but with memory. Small keepsakes from the old country sat on mantels, a brass button, a wooden comb, a scrap of embroidered cloth, a lock of hair in a ribbon. These fragments carried warmth of their own, symbols of belonging when everything else was strange. You can almost see them now, glinting softly in the firelight, reminders that comfort often begins in the heart before it reaches the body. One forgotten practice mentioned in Scandinavian immigrant diaries involved sitting quietly by the fire at dusk, sharing stories from home before saying evening prayers. They called it telling time, not in the sense of clocks but of keeping history alive. Every retold story became a blanket, wrapping the family in familiarity. Some settlers described the telling of a good memory as being warmer than 3 logs on the fire. In this little cabin, where cold pressed on every wall, the imagination became another source of heat. Some scholars have argued that nostalgia was a form of resistance against the loneliness of the frontier. Remembering where you came from was a way of staying human amid isolation. Others see it as emotional exhaustion, a yearning that could never quite be satisfied. Yet both ideas share the same truth. The mind needed warmth just as much as the body. Without memory, even the brightest fire could not keep out the cold. You watch the family as they gather near the hearth. The father mends a boot, his fingers dark with wax and soot. The mother hums softly, her voice a thread of sound winding through the air. The children sit cross-legged, watching a pot simmer, the smell of apples and cinnamon spreading slowly through the room. The light flickers across their faces, and for a moment everything feels suspended in quiet grace. It is a portrait of endurance, softened by tenderness. One traveller who visited a remote settlement in 1814 described walking past a row of cabins at dusk and seeing their windows glow like tiny stars against the snow. He wrote, "Each light is a heart still beating." That line captures the miracle of what you see here. Every flicker of flame, every remembered story, every breath drawn in the dim air is a refusal to surrender. The pioneers did not only survive the cold, they outshone it. You close your eyes and imagine the thoughts that filled these afternoons. Memories of laughter echoing across the sea, the taste of bread baked by someone long gone, the warmth of a familiar hand once held, now only remembered through a wedding ring that catches the firelight. Nostalgia is not sorrow here. It is a quiet fire of its own. It burns in the mind, steady and golden, pushing back the endless winter. The shadows stretch longer as daylight fades. The mother sets aside her work, and the father stirs the fire to life again. Sparks leap upward, bright and brief. The air hums with renewed warmth. The family settles into their places, the children leaning against one another, the dog curling by their feet. The glow of the hearth deepens, wrapping them in a soft cocoon of light. You can smell the apples, the smoke, the faint sweetness of the past still hanging in the air. For the pioneers, dreams of home were not escapes from hardship, but companions to it. In the glow of this fire, you understand how they found peace even in exile. The flames rise a little higher, and the warmth spreads outward, blurring the edges of grief and comfort. The night gathers outside, silent and vast, but inside the cabin, the past and present rest together in the same gentle light. The night has deepened, and the forest outside feels almost alive with listening. The moonlight touches the snow with silver edges, and the trees stand like tall black sentinels watching over the sleeping world. Inside the cabin, the fire has been banked for the night, glowing faintly under a layer of ash. The air is still and soft until a sudden sound breaks it, a knock at the door, sharp and hurried. You sit up, your heart pounding. The father rises, pulls on his boots, and reaches for the latch. According to accounts from frontier families, a knock after dark was never taken lightly. It could mean a neighbor in trouble, a traveler lost in the woods, or in rare cases something far worse. The wilderness did not forgive mistakes, and people learned quickly that even a few hours in the cold could turn deadly. The rule was simple: no one was turned away. To refuse a knock at night was to risk your own soul, as well as your neighbor's life. The father opens the door, and a gust of freezing wind rushes inside, scattering ash across the hearth. A man stands there, his breath visible in the air, his face pale under the moonlight. He is wrapped in a ragged coat, snow caked on his shoulders. Behind him, the dark woods stretch endlessly. He stammers an apology, his voice cracking from cold. The mother moves quickly, guiding him toward the fire. Within moments, she is wrapping him in blankets, pressing a cup of warm broth into his trembling hands. Contemporary journals describe moments like this in vivid detail. Travelers were common during the early years of settlement. Peddlers, preachers, trappers, and families moving west in search of land. Many depended on the kindness of strangers. guided by the faint glow of firelight from cabin windows. Those who opened their doors often spoke later of the mixture of fear and faith that came with it. The stranger might be friend, but he might also be desperate. Still, hospitality was a sacred duty. One curious entry from an 1816 almanac lists rules of welcome kept by homesteaders. It advised that every guest be offered food, fire, and floor space, no matter how small the cabin. In return, the visitor was expected to share news, help with chores, or at least tell a story before morning. The exchange was both moral and practical, binding isolated families together in the vast emptiness of winter. The man in this cabin speaks slowly, his voice still shaking. He tells of a horse lost in a storm, of wandering through the forest for hours before spotting the chimney smoke. The father nods quietly, listening. He knows this story too well. The mother ladles another bowl of stew and pushes it toward him. The children peer from behind the quilts, their eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. The dog growls once, then settles again when the stranger lowers his gaze. According to one settler's memoir, the fear of intrusion never fully left frontier life. Stories spread of thieves or drifters who used hospitality as a trap. Yet most families still chose to open their doors. One woman wrote that, "Trust is the last fire we can bank against the dark." Her words carried the truth of an age when survival demanded both courage and compassion. A lesser-known account from a small community near the Great Lakes tells of a night when two families, separated by miles of forest, saved one another's lives by answering a midnight knock. In one cabin, a child was dying of fever. In the other, a woman had medicine. They met halfway, each carrying a lantern through the snow. Their footprints in the morning, side by side, became a symbol of faith passed down for generations. Some historians suggest that this culture of mutual rescue shaped the moral landscape of early America. Others argue that it simply grew from necessity. Either way, the habit of answering the door, of trusting the knock, became part of what defined community in the wilderness. The frontier might be cold and unforgiving, but humanity found ways to keep its flame alive. The stranger finishes his meal and begins to thaw, color returning to his cheeks. The mother drapes another blanket over his shoulders and sets a log carefully onto the fire. The father sits across from him, speaking in low tones about the road ahead, about wolves spotted near the ridge, about small miracles that hold people together in winters like this. The conversation drifts, soft and measured, blending with the pop of the fire and the faint whistle of the wind at the window. You can feel the tension easing in the room. The stranger's eyelids grow heavy, and he leans back against the wall. The family settles again, each finding a small space to rest. The fire hums gently, shadows moving like liquid across the walls. Outside, the forest returns to its quiet watch. One traveler's letter from 1819 ends with a sentence that fits this moment perfectly. "I slept in a stranger's home and woke as a brother." The phrase captures what happened so many times on these frozen nights, when warmth and kindness bound lives together for a single fleeting moment. The father rises once more to check the latch, making sure the door is secure against the wind. The stranger sighs in his sleep. The dog curls beside him, and the fire gives off a soft crackle that fills the silence. The room glows faintly, golden and calm. You close your eyes, feeling the deep peace that follows fear's retreat. In this small space, where trust outweighs caution, the world feels merciful again. Outside, the cold waits patiently, but inside, humanity has already won for one more night. The next morning breaks cold and bright, the kind of light that glitters on the snow until it almost hurts to look at it. The stranger has gone, leaving behind a few quiet words of thanks and a promise to send help if he reached town. The family watches him fade into the white distance before closing the door. The cabin settles again into its familiar rhythm. The fire hums. The children whisper. The mother sweeps the floor. The father bends to his tools, and you notice something new in the room. A freshly built bed raised slightly above the ground. its wooden frame simple but carefully crafted. According to written inventories from frontier settlements, the invention of a raised bedstead was one of the great comforts of cabin life. At first, many families slept directly on straw mats spread across the floor, but as tools became more available, they began to lift their bedding off the cold ground. It was a small change with a large effect. The air beneath the bed helped keep blankets dry, and the extra height made it easier to escape the drafts that crawled across the floorboards. A few inches of wood could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. One surviving account from a settler in Indiana describes how proud he felt after building the family's first bedstead. "It stood high as my knees," he wrote, "and no rat dared visit in the night." The structure was simple: 4 posts, 2 rails, and ropes stretched in a crisscross pattern to hold the mattress. When the ropes sagged, the family tightened them with a wooden key. It was from this habit, he explained, that the old phrase, "sleep tight," was born. You step closer to this new bed. The wood still smells fresh, and the surface gleams faintly from the oil rubbed into it. The mattress is filled with straw, the quilt neatly folded on top. You can almost feel the pride that comes from turning raw wood into something that offers rest. The father runs his hand over the frame, checking each joint. The children climb up one by one, laughing softly as the ropes creak beneath them. The mother watches with a smile that holds exhaustion and relief in equal measure. According to carpentry notes from that era, bedsteads were often built from whatever wood grew nearby: oak for strength, pine for ease of shaping, hickory for durability. Some settlers carved small initials into the posts as blessings, a way to mark the bed as part of the family. When a child was born, a new notch was sometimes added. The bed became not just furniture, but a record of life itself. One curious observation from a traveler's diary tells of a family who slept in a bed so high they needed a small ladder to climb onto it. Beneath the frame they stored baskets, tools, and even a few hens that pecked quietly in the straw. The writer joked that the bed served as both barn and palace, but his tone carried admiration. Every piece of the cabin had to work twice, sometimes 3 times over. Even sleep had to make room for survival. Historians have long debated how much comfort the pioneers truly found in these small inventions. Some claim that the elevated bed changed their quality of life more than any other domestic improvement of the time. Others argue that it only disguised hardship, giving the illusion of civility inside a wilderness that remained merciless. Yet, reading the journals and letters, you sense that comfort, even symbolic, mattered deeply. The bed represented progress. It was a declaration that life could be improved, one plank at a time. The family prepares for sleep again that night, and the new bed becomes the center of quiet ceremony. The father tightens the ropes carefully, the mother smooths the quilt, and the children climb in together, whispering that it feels like floating. The dog circles twice on the rug below and sighs contentedly. The air smells faintly of pine shavings and warmth. A lesser-known detail from letters kept in family archives mentions that new bedsteads were often christened with prayer. The mother would stand at the foot of the bed and say, "May we rise in peace as we rest in peace." The words echoed a much older blessing from Europe, carried across oceans and through generations. You can almost hear her voice now, steady and soft, rising over the hiss of the fire. The father lies down beside her, the straw mattress crunching beneath their weight. The sound is gentle, like dry leaves underfoot. The firelight dances across the beams above, casting ripples of orange and gold. Outside, the snow glows faintly under the moon, the world frozen but still. Inside, the raised bed creaks once, then settles into silence. The family breathes together, the warmth of their bodies rising toward the rafters. One carpenter's note from the period claims that a bed well built teaches rest. It was not only about wood and nails, but about intention, about crafting a piece of security out of emptiness. You can feel that now, the pride in something made by hand, the peace that comes from it holding firm under your weight. The cabin may still be small, the nights long, the cold relentless, but in this moment, the family rests higher than the earth that tries to claim them. The night stretches long, quiet, and deep. The fire burns low again, its light flickering gently over the walls, leaving soft shadows that seem to breathe. The air smells faintly of tallow and pine. A single candle burns on the table, its flame small but steady, a golden drop trembling in the dark. You sit close to it, watching the wax run slowly down its side, hearing the faint hiss each time it sputters. In a world without electricity, this little light holds more power than you can imagine. According to accounts from settlers and travelers alike, candles were among the most precious possessions in an early American cabin. Each one took hours to make, using melted animal fat or beeswax poured around a linen wick. Families saved them for the longest nights of winter, when the moon disappeared behind snow clouds and the fire could not reach every corner of the room. To light a candle was to declare defiance against the dark, to bring back the sun for a few hours. The soft glow made even the roughest cabin feel almost holy. One curious entry in an old housekeeper's journal describes the process of candle making as both tedious and satisfying. The writer explained how she dipped a dozen wicks at once into warm tallow, lifting them again and again until the layers hardened. Each dip added another whisper of light to the future. When finished, the candles were hung to cool, swaying gently like pale fruit from the rafters. The smell lingered for days, rich, waxy, faintly sweet and earthy all at once. You can imagine that same scent filling the cabin now. The mother trims the wick with small scissors to keep the flame from smoking. The father sits beside her, his face lit softly, reading from a worn Bible with letters fading at the edges. The children listen, their eyes half closed, lulled by his low, steady voice. The candlelight makes the room glow like amber, blurring the lines between shadow and warmth. According to surviving letters from missionaries and schoolteachers who lived on the frontier, evenings like this were often the only time people could read or write. Many learned their letters by firelight, squinting over primers or copying verses into small notebooks made from scraps of paper. The candle was both teacher and companion, its steady flame encouraging patience. A single candle might burn for 6 hours, but its light could shape a lifetime. One lesser-known detail mentioned in local folklore is that many families believed the candle's flame reflected the soul's mood. If it flickered wildly, someone far away was thinking of you. If it burned low and blue, illness or sorrow might be near. These beliefs turned light itself into a form of language, a quiet conversation between the living and the unseen. You can almost feel that belief now, sitting beside this small, glowing heart of fire, listening to it whisper in the stillness. Some cultural historians argue that the candle became more than a tool for light. It was a symbol of dignity, proof that even in the harshest conditions, people sought beauty. Others note that it also revealed fear. The flame could be blown out by a single gust, leaving a room swallowed by darkness and silence. It reminded the pioneers that everything they cherished could vanish as easily as breath. Yet still they lit it every night. The father finishes reading and closes the book. The children are already half asleep, their faces golden in the dim glow. The mother lowers the candle into a tin holder to shield it from drafts. The shadows climb higher along the walls, thickening at the ceiling where smoke stains form faint rings. Outside, the night deepens until even the snow seems to disappear. Inside, the only movement is the candle flame trembling like a living pulse. One traveller in 1811 wrote of visiting a cabin lit by 3 candles at once and described it as bright as heaven. You can understand why. Each flame changes the air around it, softening every harsh line, turning rough wood into gold and faces into warmth. In that glow, the world becomes smaller but gentler. It holds everything essential: the people you love, the fire that feeds you, the faith that tomorrow will come again. The candle burns lower. The mother pinches the wick between her fingers and blows softly. The room exhales with her. The darkness returns, thick but not frightening, for the embers in the hearth still glow faintly red. You feel the quiet settle again, the peace that follows after light. The family drifts towards sleep, and even the night outside seems to pause, respecting their rest. A scholar once described this nightly ritual as an act of fragile hope repeated endlessly. You think about that now, watching the last curl of smoke rise from the snuffed wick. The air smells faintly of melted wax and ash. The flame may have vanished, but its warmth lingers, invisible yet real. The candlelight has gone, but it has left its mark, a small circle of tenderness in a world of cold and dark. And that, perhaps, is the truest kind of light there is. The cabin sleeps in deep quiet until a faint sound stirs you awake. It is a cough, dry and weak, followed by a low murmur. The fire has burned down to ash, and the air feels colder than before. You rise slowly, your breath forming white clouds in the darkness. The mother is awake too, sitting beside the bed, her face pale in the faint light that seeps through the window. One of the children is feverish. You can feel the tension in the room, the hush of worry pressing close. According to medical notes from frontier journals, illness during winter was one of the greatest fears of the early settlers. Doctors were rare, medicine scarcer still. When fever struck, families relied on what knowledge they carried, mixed with superstition and prayer. Warmth became the first remedy for every sickness. The fire was the doctor, the quilts were the nurses, and hope was the only prescription that never ran out. One household record from 1808 describes how families treated chills and frostbite with heated stones wrapped in cloth. They placed them at the feet or pressed them gently against the chest. Others brewed teas from willow bark, pine needles, or dried elderflower, letting the steam fill the air while the patient breathed it in. Every cabin had its secret recipe, handed down like treasure. The ingredients changed, but the purpose never did: to bring warmth back into the body and keep death waiting outside the door. The mother moves quietly now, stirring a small pot by the hearth. The smell of herbs fills the room, sharp and green, cutting through the thick scent of smoke. She tests the warmth of the liquid on her wrist before giving the child a sip. The father kneels by the fire, coaxing new flames from the dying coals. His hands move fast but gently, his jaw tight with worry. You can feel the fear beneath their calm. Out here, sickness travels faster than the wind and leaves no time for panic. According to missionary reports from the northern frontier, even a common cold could turn deadly in a cabin sealed tight against winter. The same walls that kept out the frost also trapped smoke and dampness. Children coughed through the night, and families prayed for spring to bring fresh air. Some built small vents in the roof to let the sickness escape, believing the wind could carry illness away. It was half faith, half instinct, and sometimes it worked. One curious account from a diary kept by a midwife tells of using animal fat as a salve for frostbite and sores. She wrote of rubbing it into the skin until it glowed, warming both body and spirit. Another entry describes placing onions in the corners of the room to draw out bad humors. Modern science might laugh at such remedies, but in those long winters, faith and improvisation were often enough to keep people alive. The mother hums softly as she strokes the child's hair, her voice barely above a whisper. The tune is simple, ancient, and soothing. The father lays his palm against the child's forehead and nods in relief when he feels the fever beginning to ease. The firelight catches in their eyes, reflecting both exhaustion and devotion. You realize that love itself is another kind of medicine here, quiet and persistent, burning like a small flame in the vast dark. Some social historians note that frontier families developed their own systems of healing, not just from necessity but from a deep belief in connection. The body, the earth, and the fire were all part of the same rhythm. To tend one was to tend them all. Others suggest it was simply practicality born of isolation. Whatever the reason, the people who lived in these cabins became their own healers, learning to read signs in the color of a face, the sound of a cough, the glow of a fevered cheek. The child sighs and turns over in sleep, the fever broken. The mother finally lets herself breathe, She dips a cloth in the warm water and wipes her hands slowly, her eyes heavy with fatigue. The father sits beside her, shoulders slumped, the glow of the fire soft on his skin. For a moment, no one speaks. The only sound is the quiet crackle of the logs and the faint drip of melted snow outside the door. The cabin feels sacred now, wrapped in calm after fear. One letter from a pioneer woman, written in 1813, captures this exact feeling. She wrote, "When the fever breaks, it feels as though winter itself has loosened its grip." Her words carry the truth of that moment. Warmth becomes victory. Every breath, every heartbeat feels newly precious. The family sits in silence, listening to the steady rhythm of life returning to normal. The mother drapes an extra blanket over the sleeping child and leans her head on the father's shoulder. The dog stretches near the fire, sighing in contentment. Outside, the stars burn cold and clear. Inside, the air is filled with quiet gratitude. You can smell the faint sweetness of herbs, the smoke of pine, the clean sharpness of new fire. It feels peaceful again, but you know how easily this peace can be lost. The father reaches over and stirs the embers one last time, making sure the warmth will last till morning. The flames flicker gently, washing the walls in soft orange light. The family drifts towards sleep again, weary but safe. The child breathes evenly now, the sickness fading into the shadows. You sit there a while longer, listening to the heartbeat of the cabin. In a world ruled by cold and distance, even one healed breath feels like a miracle. The dawn creeps into the cabin as a faint silver glow, soft and shy against the rough wood. The fire has burned low again, but its scent still lingers in the air. The family wakes slowly, stretching, yawning, and stirring the ashes to find the living coals beneath. The mother moves first, wrapping her shawl tightly and kneeling to coax the fire back to life. The father sits quietly for a moment, rubbing his eyes, then takes a small book from the shelf near the hearth. Its leather cover is worn smooth from years of touch. He opens it carefully, and the cabin fills with a hush that feels almost sacred. According to letters and journals from the early American frontier, faith and fire were deeply intertwined. The first light of day was often greeted with prayer or scripture read aloud beside the hearth. The warmth of the flames was seen as both physical comfort and divine grace. The fire fed the body, the word fed the spirit. Many families believed that tending one without the other left the soul cold, no matter how bright the blaze. One diary entry from a settler in 1810 describes mornings that began exactly like this. "We read by the glow," he wrote, "and in that light all fears seem smaller." The cabin itself became a church of sorts, its altar the hearth, its hymn the soft crackle of wood. These moments gave the day shape and meaning, transforming survival into something more than endurance. The act of reading aloud connected generations and softened the edge of isolation. You can almost hear that low, steady voice now. The father reads a verse about strength and patience. The mother listens, her hands resting on her lap, her face calm in the firelight. The children lean sleepily against one another, eyes half closed but attentive. Outside, the wind stirs faintly, brushing against the roof like a sigh. Inside, the air hums with warmth and quiet faith. The candle flickers once on the table, then steadies, as though agreeing with the words being spoken. According to ministers who travelled through these settlements, the Bible was often the only book a family owned. Yet within its pages they found everything: stories of hardship, hope, and redemption that mirrored their own. It gave meaning to the endless labour, to the bitter winters and uncertain harvests. Some families memorized entire passages, so that if the book were ever lost or damaged, its words would live on in their voices. In this way, faith became portable, as resilient as the people themselves. One curious recollection from a circuit preacher tells of visiting a cabin where the fire had gone out and the family could not relight it. He read from his pocket Bible while helping them strike new sparks, calling it a duel between light and dark. When the flame finally caught, The family bowed their heads and whispered a prayer of thanks. He wrote that he left feeling warmer than the fire itself could make him. You can sense that same quiet reverence now. The fire crackles softly, spreading its golden light across the cabin floor. The children are awake fully now, one holding a cup of warm cider, another poking gently at the embers with a stick. The mother hums a tune, low and rhythmic, as she folds a blanket. The father closes the book and sets it on the table with care, his face peaceful. In the hush that follows, you can almost feel gratitude floating in the air like invisible warmth. Some social historians suggest that religion on the frontier served not only as faith but as structure. It divided the endless wilderness into days, marked time, and reminded people of purpose. Others argue that belief was a way to endure the fear that silence brought. Whatever the reason, the presence of prayer and fire together made the cabin more than shelter. It made it a sanctuary. A lesser-known custom among frontier families was keeping a small stone from the hearth as a keepsake when moving westward. They believed it carried the blessing of all the fires it had touched. Some stones crossed hundreds of miles, passed down through generations. Even today, descendants write of finding these smooth relics in old boxes or drawers, reminders of homes long vanished but never forgotten. The father rises and steps outside for a moment. Cold air rushes in, sharp and bright. But when he returns, his cheeks are glowing and his eyes sparkle. He looks at the fire, now blazing strong again, and nods. The family begins their morning chores in silence, but there is a lightness to their movement. Each task feels easier, as if something unseen has lifted a weight from their shoulders. You can feel that same peace spreading through the cabin. The flames dance higher, sending sparks up the chimney. The sound is gentle, the kind that fills you without effort. The scent of burning wood mixes with the faint sweetness of baked apples from yesterday's meal. The room feels both ancient and eternal, a small corner of the world where warmth and faith hold hands. A traveller once wrote that he could tell a good home by how it glowed from within. Some shine from candles, he said, but others shine from hearts. As you sit by the fire now, watching the family move in quiet harmony, you understand what he meant. This light will not fade when the wood burns out. It will stay, resting in memory, warm as breath, bright as belief. You wake before sunrise, the light still faint and colourless, the air biting cold. The cabin is quiet except for the occasional creak of the roof adjusting under frost. The fire has died down to glowing coals, and your breath clouds softly in front of you. You reach for the blanket, rough and heavy with the smell of wool and smoke, and sit up. The moment your feet touch the floor, you feel the cold rush through you. Winter mornings always start with shock. According to early frontier diaries, waking in a log cabin during midwinter meant waking inside the weather itself. The walls could hold back the wind, but never completely banish the cold. Frost crept over windows from the inside, forming delicate patterns that looked like feathers or frozen ferns. Buckets of water left near the hearth sometimes froze on the surface before morning. The first task of every day was simple and sacred, to bring the fire back to life. You picture the father crouched at the hearth now, blowing gently on the coals, his hands cupped around the small flame that begins to glow in answer. He moves slowly, patient and practiced, feeding bits of bark and pine twigs until the fire awakens with a sudden sigh. The warmth spreads across the room like a living thing, pushing the chill toward the corners. The first light of dawn joins it, spilling through the small window in soft streaks. The mother stirs next, her hair loose over her shoulders, her face pale in the morning light. She adds another log to the flames, and the fire brightens until the room glows golden. According to one traveller's letter written in 1812, the inside of a frontier cabin in the morning smelled like wood smoke and frozen dreams returning to life. The smell of pine mingled with the faint sweetness of ashes, creating an aroma that no one forgot. Even years later, settlers who moved to towns wrote of missing that scent, the smell of beginning again every day. The children wake one by one. Their cheeks are pink, their hair tangled, their hands searching for the quilt before daring to leave its safety. The dog stretches and shakes himself, scattering bits of straw across the floor. The sound of wood popping in the fire becomes the morning bell that tells everyone it is safe to move again. The mother ladles porridge into bowls, the steam rising in soft curls. Breakfast is quiet, sleepy, filled with the sound of spoons and the faint hum of gratitude. One curious note from an English visitor describes the first moments after waking in a cabin as a lesson in humility. He wrote that no one spoke until the fire had warmed the air, as though waiting for permission from the flame itself. That ritual silence felt almost holy, a pause between night and day, where people remembered how fragile their lives were. It was not fear but awareness. The cold demanded respect, and the fire answered with mercy. Some scholars believe that this morning rhythm shaped the settlers' sense of patience. Others suggest it taught gratitude, an instinctive reverence for simple things like light and heat. Whatever the reason, the act of rekindling a fire each dawn came a quiet symbol of hope. Every new flame was a promise that another day could begin, that even in the harshest winter, the world could start again. The father stands near the window, scraping frost from the inside with a knife. Tiny flakes fall and sparkle in the firelight. Outside, the snow glows faintly blue, and the forest looks peaceful but lifeless. A thin plume of smoke curls upward from the chimney, the only sign that life endures inside. The mother hums softly as she stirs the pot, her breath mixing with the steam. The children sit close together, their laughter growing louder as the cabin warms. The dog curls beside them, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. According to old almanacs, this moment, the first full warmth of morning, was often called the thaw, not because the world outside had softened, but because the people inside had. Once the fire roared, and the first cup of cider or milk passed between hands, the day felt possible again. Work waited, but so did light. One forgotten passage from a Tennessee farmer's notes captures this moment beautifully. "The morning is mercy itself," he wrote. "For every dawn we are given the chance to rise and do again what yesterday could not finish." You can feel that truth in the cabin now. The flames rise higher, filling the air with a glow that touches everything. The table, the tools, the wooden walls. The frost on the window begins to melt, dripping slowly into clear drops that catch the light. The family prepares to begin the day. The father pulls on his coat, ready to fetch wood from the pile outside. The mother ties her apron and sets the bread to rise near the fire. The children bundle in small coats and woolen caps, their excitement returning with the light. The rhythm of life continues, steady and unhurried, anchored by warmth. A historian once called these winter mornings the quiet triumphs of survival. You understand why. There is no grand victory here, no battle or conquest, just the steady courage of getting up again. The cabin creaks as if it too is waking. The fire hums. The day begins. You sit back, letting the warmth reach your face, and realize how much strength is hidden in these small beginnings. Outside, the snow still rules the world, but inside, the light has already won. The snow begins to melt, quietly and without ceremony. You notice it first in the sound, a slow drip from the roof, a faint trickle beside the door, the soft collapse of a snowbank slipping from the logs. The air feels different, damp and alive. The frozen world outside has loosened its grip. Inside the cabin, the smell of wet earth begins to replace the scent of smoke. The long winter is ending, though it leaves its mark on everything it touches. According to settlers' diaries, the first signs of spring brought both joy and dread. The thaw meant survival, but it also meant mud, flooding, and endless repair. Cabins that had stood solid all winter began to weep at the seams as the ice inside the walls melted. Roofs leaked, floors softened, and the cold air that once kept food preserved turned the cellars sour. Still, no one complained. The thaw was proof that life had endured. One letter from a farmer's wife in 1809 describes that first day of warmth with wonder. "The air smells of soil and smoke," she wrote, "and every drip from the eaves sounds like God's own heartbeat." Her words capture the strange tenderness of that moment when the cabin stops holding its breath and begins to breathe again. You can almost smell it now, the mingling of thawing earth, wet bark, and last night's ashes. The father opens the door and steps outside into the slush. The snow clings to his boots in clumps, but beneath it the ground gives slightly under his weight. The first puddles shimmer in the sunlight, thin films of water reflecting the sky. The wind has changed too. It carries the faint scent of pine and moss instead of sharp frost. The mother appears beside him, her shawl pulled tight, eyes squinting against the brightness. Behind her, the children laugh as they press their palms to the damp glass of the window, watching the world come back to life. According to travel accounts from the early frontier, people often described the thaw as an awakening of both land and spirit. Families who had not seen neighbors in months would emerge from their cabins, walking across the soft ground to exchange news and smiles. Roads reappeared, rivers began to move again, and the sound of dripping water filled the forests like music. The thaw was not just a season, it was a promise fulfilled. One forgotten entry from a Maine woodcutter's journal records how he marked this day each year. He hung his axe on the cabin wall and refused to swing it for 24 hours, calling it the day of rest for trees. He said the forest had worked as hard as he had through the winter and deserved peace. The thought feels strangely gentle for a man who lived by chopping wood, but perhaps hardship teaches tenderness more than comfort ever can. Inside, the family begins the slow process of spring cleaning. The mother sweeps the floor with renewed energy, chasing out the soot and dust that have gathered through the long months. The father lifts the shutters to let the light flood in. The children help roll up blankets and carry them outside to shake clean. Even the dog seems lighter, nosing at the open door, curious about the wet air. You can feel the cabin itself stretch, its timbers groaning softly, adjusting to warmth after so much cold. According to local folklore, the first fire made after the thaw was considered special. Some families called it the thank you fire. They burned small twigs from the oldest trees near their homes as a gesture of gratitude. The smoke was believed to carry thanks to whatever forces had kept them alive through the season. Historians argue whether the custom had religious roots or was simply a way to mark survival, but the meaning remains clear. The end of winter was not taken for granted. The father builds that fire now, smaller than before, more for comfort than defense. The smoke rises lazily, curling through the new light streaming from the window. The warmth feels different, less desperate, more peaceful. The mother hums as she works, her voice soft and content. The children's laughter drifts in from outside as they splash in puddles, their boots soaked but spirits unbroken. The dog barks once, tail wagging, as if greeting the returning world. One traveller from the period wrote that spring on the frontier was a second birth of the soul. He described standing in the doorway of a cabin like this one, listening to the steady rhythm of melting snow, feeling both smaller and freer than ever before. "The land forgives," he wrote, "and so do we." You can almost feel that forgiveness in the air now, as the cold recedes and the fire's warmth becomes gentle again. The sun climbs higher, and the light inside the cabin grows brighter, softer. The shadows that once ruled the room retreat to the corners. The air smells of wet soil, wood sap, and something faintly sweet, like life beginning to stir again. The family sits for a moment in silence, watching water drip from the roof, each drop falling like a note in a song they have waited months to hear. A historian once said that the true miracle of the pioneers was not that they conquered nature, but that they learned to endure it long enough to see it change. You understand that now. The thaw is not triumph. It is renewal. Every drop of melting snow, Every creak of timber, every sigh of warm air is a victory written in patience. The cabin stands strong, weathered but alive, a shelter that has kept its promise. The days grow longer, the sun rises earlier and lingers on the horizon like a patient guest who has finally decided to stay. The snow outside has melted into streams that twist through the grass, and the once white ground is now dark and soft. The cabin smells of new air, the kind that carries the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The fire burns smaller now, no longer a battle but a companion. For the first time in months, the cold does not feel like an enemy. According to the journals of early farmers, this was the season when people began to measure themselves against the lessons of winter. They wrote of how every hardship had taught them something: how to store wood better, how to seal walls tighter, how to stretch food further. More importantly, they learned how to endure without breaking. The cold, they said, did not just test their bodies, it tempered their spirits like iron. You can almost feel that quiet strength in the air now, a calm that comes only after surviving what once seemed impossible. One letter from a widow in Vermont, written in 1811, captures this perfectly. "I do not thank God for comfort," she wrote, "but for the strength to do without it." Her words hold the heart of frontier wisdom, gratitude not for ease, but for resilience. The winter was a teacher, stern and merciless. But every family that saw the thaw had passed its lesson. They carried that strength into every spring, wearing it like armor, invisible but unbreakable. The father sits outside on the porch, sharpening an axe that hardly saw rest all winter. His hands are cracked but steady. The mother kneels nearby, scrubbing wooden bowls with melted snow water that has turned the color of earth. The children chase each other through the soft mud, their laughter breaking the stillness like birdsong. The dog barks at nothing in particular, just because the sound feels good again. Inside the cabin, the windows are thrown open, and fresh air rushes through the room, scattering ashes and memories of frost. According to early settlement records, many families treated the end of winter as a kind of renewal ceremony. They cleaned every corner, aired every blanket, and polished tools until they gleamed. Some even took apart furniture to check for insects that had hidden through the cold months. Every sweep of a broom and every open door was an act of gratitude disguised as housekeeping. They were clearing out not just soot and dust, but the heaviness of fear. A curious story from a Pennsylvania farmstead describes a mother who saved a jar of snow each winter and poured it out on the first warm day as a farewell. She called it the last breath of the season. She claimed it brought good luck, though perhaps what it really brought was closure. The pioneers invented their own small rituals to give meaning to things that had no words. In their world, survival was not enough. It had to feel sacred. Some scholars suggest that the rhythm of these yearly hardships built a collective identity among frontier families. It taught them humility in the face of nature, but also confidence in their ability to adapt. Others believe it made them deeply practical, their faith shaped by necessity. Whatever the truth, these people found beauty in persistence. They learned that comfort is not what keeps you alive, hope does. Inside the cabin, the mother lays the quilts by the window to catch the Sunday. The colors, once dull from smoke, brighten again under the light. The father runs his hand along the wall, feeling the dried clay between the logs, proud that his work has held. The air smells of warmth, of possibility. You can almost sense the house itself breathing easier, no longer a fortress, but a home once more. One old diary kept by a preacher's wife tells of a tradition she called the Spring Promise. On the first warm evening, her family would gather by the hearth and thank the fire aloud for its service before letting it burn out naturally. "It is the one time," she wrote, "when silence in the chimney feels right." They would then step outside, look at the stars, and listen to the running water nearby. In that sound, they heard the voice of renewal. You can imagine this family doing the same now. The fire burns low, its glow soft and steady. The father sets down his axe and joins his wife at the doorway. The children stand barefoot in the damp grass, marveling at the puddles reflecting the orange light of sunset. The dog sits beside them, tail wagging slowly, ears perked at the evening song of birds. The air hums with life again. According to one historian's reflection on this period, the pioneers' true victory was not over the wilderness, but within it. They learned to bend without breaking, to listen to the earth instead of defying it. The cold taught patience, the thaw taught gratitude, and together they built a kind of wisdom that modern comfort rarely remembers. The last of the snow melts away in the shadows near the tree line. The river nearby begins to sing louder, carrying bits of ice toward distant waters. Inside the cabin, the fire dims, but no one minds. The warmth that fills the room now comes not just from flame, but from memory, from strength earned one frozen night at a time. You listen to the sound of dripping water, the slow, peaceful rhythm of life beginning again, and you understand the quiet truth that kept them alive. The hardest seasons are the ones that teach the heart how to stay warm. The days settle into a rhythm again. The air is cool, but no longer cruel. You can feel spring stretching its fingers through the soil, pulling life back into the world one root at a time. The trees outside drip quietly from last night's rain, their trunks dark and glistening. A faint breeze slips through the cracks between the logs, carrying the scent of wet leaves and smoke. Inside the cabin, everything feels lighter. The fire burns smaller now, but it is still the center of life. Its glow is no longer fierce, only steady and kind. According to the diaries of settlers and homesteaders, this was the time of rebuilding. After every winter came the careful work of repair. The pioneers patched roofs, tightened door frames, and checked the logs for signs of rot. They refilled the cracks between timbers with clay and moss, sealing the cabin anew against the seasons ahead. This work was not just maintenance. It was gratitude made visible. The cabin had carried them through another winter, and they repaid it with care. One journal, kept by a woman in 1814, describes her family's spring ritual. "We thanked the walls," she wrote, "for standing between us and death." Her words might sound strange today, but to her, the logs were more than wood. They were witnesses, companions, even protectors. Every nail and beam held the memory of their breath, their laughter, their fear. You can imagine her hand brushing the wall as she said it, the same way someone might stroke the face of a friend. The father in this cabin does much the same. He walks slowly around the outside, running his hand along the wood, inspecting each seam. The mother follows behind him with a basket of tools and scraps of moss. Together, they work in quiet rhythm, filling gaps, smoothing edges, speaking only when necessary. The children carry small bundles of straw and laugh when the wind scatters them. The sound of their laughter blends with the creak of the forest and the call of birds returning home. According to Carpenter's notes from that time, the yearly sealing of a log cabin was one of the most important tasks for survival. They called the mixture used chinking, a blend of clay, ash, and straw packed tightly into the spaces between logs. It kept out wind, rain, and insects, and it symbolized something deeper too, the act of holding together what the cold had tried to break apart. Many settlers said that the smell of fresh chinking meant safety. It meant they were still here. One lesser-known entry from a frontier tradesman mentions that families often added bits of crushed charcoal or ground limestone to the mix to make it stronger. Some used animal hair instead of straw. Others pressed small tokens or lucky charms into the wet clay, a button, a feather, a coin to bless the cabin for another year. You can imagine a child secretly slipping in a pebble or a wildflower petal, offering a private prayer for warmth next winter. Some historians have written that this spring maintenance was a kind of meditation. The slow, repetitive work gave people time to think, to breathe, to remember. Others argue it was simply habit, the continuation of labor in a world where rest was rare. Yet when you stand here, watching the family move with quiet purpose, you sense something deeper. Every motion speaks of love disguised as duty. Inside, the cabin looks different too. The walls, scrubbed clean of soot, glow faintly in the sunlight. The quilts are aired out, the tools hung neatly by the door. The scent of pine, clay, and ash fills the room, earthy and fresh. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, smaller now but still alive, the way a heart keeps beating even after fear has passed. A letter from a minister traveling through Kentucky describes visiting such a home. He wrote, "I have seen great churches built of stone, but none that seem so blessed as the log house that smells of smoke and clay." His words capture what you feel in this space. The cabin itself is not grand, but it holds something sacred, the quiet triumph of people who have made peace with the wild. The family pauses for a moment, standing outside together. The mother wipes her hands on her apron, the father straightens his back, and the children squint up at the sky. The clouds drift slowly, and a single bird circles above them before vanishing into the trees. The air is full of small sounds, dripping water, creaking branches, the whisper of thawed earth beneath their boots. Life hums quietly in every direction. One traveller who passed through the frontier in 1817 described this season as the time when the world begins to trust again. After months of silence and survival, the land opens itself, forgiving the cold. The people, too, forgive the hardship that nearly broke them. They return to work, to laughter, to the slow, patient rhythm of living. The same pattern repeats every year, as if written in the bones of the earth itself. The family heads back inside. The father adds one last piece of wood to the fire. The mother kneels to sweep the hearth. The cabin smells of warmth and effort, the kind that comes only from honest hands. The light outside softens toward evening, and the air cools again, but no one hurries. The house is ready, sealed, renewed. The fire flickers like a heartbeat, and you can feel the contentment that fills the room. They have survived the winter, and now they belong to the world again. The logs, the fire, the air, and the people all breathing together, all part of the same slow and beautiful cycle of endurance. The sun is higher now, and its warmth lingers long after morning fades. The ground outside the cabin is soft underfoot, patched with early green. Thin shoots of grass reach through the mud, and small flowers brave enough to bloom tremble in the breeze. The forest smells alive again, a blend of sap, soil, and rain. Inside the cabin, the family has opened every window. Fresh air rushes through the rooms, carrying away the last traces of smoke and winter. According to travelers' accounts from the early 1800s, the arrival of spring was both liberation and reminder. Families who had survived the cold now faced the work of living again, planting, hunting, mending, and rebuilding what the frost had broken. The warmth brought joy, but also restlessness. People longed to move, to stretch their legs after months of confinement. The thaw of the land echoed inside their bones. One woman's letter from 1815 captures this change beautifully. "I walked outside today without fear," she wrote. "The air touched my skin like forgiveness." For months, every breath had been measured and every movement guarded against the cold. Now, life expanded again. The same forest that once threatened them with hunger and frost now offered food, light, and sound. Birds returned to the trees, their songs ringing clear through the open windows. The mother stands by the hearth, though the fire is small now, more symbol than necessity. She stirs a pot of stew made from dried meat and the first wild greens of the season. The father sits nearby, carving a new handle for his axe, his knife moving with slow precision. The children chase the dog around the yard, laughing, their bare feet splashing through puddles. The sound of their voices drifts inside, mixing with the steady rhythm of the knife and the bubbling stew. According to frontier records, the first outdoor work after winter felt almost ceremonial. Fields were cleared, fences mended, tools oiled. Some families marked the start of the planting season with prayer, others with song. It was the beginning of a new chapter, the proof that endurance had not been in vain. The settlers knew that survival was not the end of their labor. It was only the beginning of another cycle. One curious entry in a farmer's journal tells of an old superstition that the first seed sown must be blessed with fire ash from the winter hearth. The farmer scattered a handful into the soil, believing it carried strength from the flame that had guarded them through the long dark. Whether or not it made the crops grow better, the act itself mattered. It was a gesture of connection, a way to thank the past for feeding the future. Some historians have written that these small rituals, burning ashes, cleaning hearths, blessing tools, were as important as the work itself. They gave rhythm to survival. Others argue that such customs were merely practical, born of necessity. But when you see the family now, standing together in the soft light of afternoon, you sense that both are true. They work not only to live, but to remember why life is worth living. The father steps outside, his boots sinking into the damp ground. He tests the soil with the tip of his knife and nods, satisfied. The mother joins him, wiping her hands on her apron, her face soft with pride. The children run to them, carrying a handful of wildflowers as if to offer them to the earth itself. You can almost smell the sweetness of the blossoms, fragile yet stubborn, clinging to life like every soul that endured this place. According to oral histories passed down through frontier families, the first spring flowers were often pressed between pages of the family Bible. Some called them proofs of mercy. Each year's flower was saved beside the last, forming a record of seasons survived. Long after the cabins had crumbled, those faded petals remained in books and boxes, silent testimonies of endurance. One traveller who visited a pioneer home in 1820 described standing by an open window at dusk, watching the smoke from the hearth drift upward and disappear into the blue sky. He wrote, "The cabin breathes with the land again." That image lingers as you watch the family's home now. The smoke curls upward, soft and thin, blending with the clouds above the forest. It is not a signal of distress, but a sigh of peace. Inside, the fire glows faintly, and the smell of stew fills the room. The children's laughter fades into quiet chatter. The mother hums as she sets the table, her song rising and falling with the sound of the spoon against the pot. The father closes the door and leans his axe in the corner. The day's work done. The air inside is warm but fresh, a balance between home and world. A scholar once wrote that the frontier families lived in cycles of endurance and grace. Watching this moment, you understand why. The cold was their teacher, but the warmth was their reward. They did not fight nature. They moved with it, learned from it, and in doing so became part of its rhythm. The sun dips behind the trees, turning the sky to gold. Shadows grow long across the clearing. Inside the cabin, the family gathers around the table, their faces bright with the soft glow of firelight and peace. The first spring meal feels like a blessing earned one ember, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound of their laughter and the scent of stew linger in your mind. It is the sound of survival turning into life again, gentle and unhurried. Outside, the night waits, but this time it feels kind. The season has turned fully now. The air is bright and soft, filled with the sounds of birds and running water. The ground that once froze solid beneath the cabin has warmed enough for the first green shoots to rise through it. The family wakes to light instead of darkness. For the first time in months, the windows are open wide. A cool breeze drifts through the room, brushing against the quilts and stirring the ashes in the hearth. The fire is almost out now, its work nearly done. According to letters written by settlers in the early frontier years, the end of the cold season felt almost like waking from a long sleep. The days stretched farther, and the rhythm of survival softened into something more like living. People smiled more easily. Neighbors appeared again on the horizon, walking across muddy fields with baskets or tools in hand. Each visit began the same way: a laugh, a hug, and the words, "We made it." One journal from 1817 describes this transformation in tender detail. "The cabin no longer smells of smoke but of earth," wrote a farmer from the Ohio Valley. "We have come out of the dark." The phrase feels both literal and spiritual. The fire that once guarded the family from death now flickers only for comfort. The heavy quilts are folded away, replaced by linen. The sound of the forest replaces the silence of snow. Every detail in this moment speaks of renewal. The mother kneels near the hearth, brushing away the last bits of ash. She smiles at the faint warmth that still lingers, the ghost of hundreds of nights spent beside it. The father steps outside, his shadow long in the morning light. He looks over the field beyond the trees, where the soil waits to be turned. The children run barefoot through the grass, shouting with laughter as they chase the dog through puddles. The cabin door stays open now, letting the whole world in. According to accounts from the period, spring was not a time of rest but of joy and movement. The work ahead was heavy, yet it no longer felt like survival. It felt like promise. The people who had spent months trapped by cold now filled their lungs with warm air, their eyes with color. They carried the memory of the fire within them, not as fear but as wisdom. They knew what it took to keep the flame alive, and that knowledge changed how they saw the world. One forgotten detail from a frontier woman's diary describes the moment she first hung her bedding outside in spring. She wrote that the quilts, stiff from smoke and use, fluttered like wings in the breeze. She called it the house breathing out. Her words linger as you look at the cabin now. Its walls no longer hold in the smell of smoke. They release it into the sunlight. The home has exhaled, and life has filled the space again. Some historians say that these early settlers developed a kind of seasonal faith. Winter taught humility, spring taught gratitude. Others believe it was not faith at all but simple rhythm, learned from the land itself. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: a deep, quiet respect for the cycle that gave and took with equal patience. To survive in such a place required more than strength. It required surrender to something larger than fear. The father begins to plough the small garden behind the cabin. His movements are slow but sure. The mother scatters the last of their saved seeds, each one small and pale against the dark soil. The children help, patting the earth with their hands. Their laughter rises with the calls of returning birds. You can smell the soil, rich and damp, mixing with the faint sweetness of sap from the trees. The fire inside has burned low, but the world outside has caught flame with life again. One traveller's note from 1820 described watching a family like this and writing, "Their warmth has moved from the hearth into their hands." It feels true here. The fire that once kept them alive now lives in their labor, in the energy of planting, mending, and rebuilding. The cabin no longer stands as a shield against the cold, but as a part of the living landscape around it. The day passes gently. The light changes from gold to rose, and the first stars appear above the clearing. The family sits together outside now, the door open behind them, the cabin glowing faintly in the dusk. The father speaks softly, pointing at the horizon. The mother leans her head on his shoulder. The children watch fireflies blink in the tall grass. Even the dog is quiet, content in the cool air. According to a letter preserved in an archive in Pennsylvania, one settler ended her final entry of winter with a single line: "The fire has taught us how to wait." You can feel that truth in this quiet evening. The patience, the endurance, the calm acceptance of both cold and warmth, they are the gifts of the season that has finally passed. The last ember in the hearth fades into black, but no one moves to stir it. It has earned its rest. The night hums softly, filled with the music of water, insects, and wind. The air smells clean, alive, forgiving. You can almost feel the cabin itself relax, its logs warm from the inside, its silence filled not with fear but with peace. The family goes inside, closing the door gently behind them. The stars shimmer through the trees, and the breeze whistles